Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Snoozy Scientist, where we wander gently through the deepest mysteries of our planet, one sleepy yawn at a time. Whether you're listening from your bed, wrapped in quiet blankets, or drifting through that gentle space where thoughts begin to blur, this calm spot has been made specially for you. A gentle space where curiosity and science sit side by side to help you relax. Tonight, we're traveling back far beyond the age of whales and sharks, before the first bird took flight, before the first flower opened to the sun, even before the dinosaurs thundered across the land. We're going back more than 250 million years to a time when the world was ruled not by creatures of the land, but by monsters of the sea. Back then, the world looked very different. Most of Earth was covered in shallow tropical seas, warm, glittering blue that stretched from horizon to horizon. The land above was quiet and bare, but beneath the waves, the water moved with power. It was alive with predators that defied imagination, creatures that once walked on land but had returned to the sea, sculpted by evolution into living torpedoes, air-breathing reptiles built for speed and precision. Some were as long as buses, their skin dark and smooth like wet stone. Others stretched their necks through beams of sunlight, their flippers beating in perfect rhythm like wings made for water. Their teeth could shear through bone, their eyes, vast and unblinking, pierced the dim light of the deep. They gave birth in the open ocean. They hunted each other with intelligence and precision. For nearly 200 million years, the sea belonged to them. They mastered a world without gravity, where power was measured not in speed or strength alone, but in stillness, in patience, in design. They had everything evolution could offer, and yet they disappeared. But who were these forgotten kings of the ocean? How did they come to rule a world so vast? And what finally brought their reign to an end? Tonight, we'll slip gently into those ancient waters to meet evolution's most elegant monsters. But before we sink too deep into the past, I just want to take a moment to appreciate every one of you who have been drifting off to these videos, liking them and leaving thoughtful notes in the comments. Your support is what allows this little corner of calm to keep growing. Thank you. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there. It's always a joy to see how far these sleepy stories drift across the world. So now, take a deep breath in, let it out slowly. And together, let's return to the age before sharks to meet the forgotten kings of the ocean. When the last echoes of the great dying faded, Earth fell into a strange and quiet stillness. The seas, once filled with forests of coral and drifting shoals of light, had turned into wastelands of silence. Almost every living thing beneath the waves had vanished. 9 out of 10 species that once thrived in the ancient oceans were gone. For a time, the world seemed almost empty. The surface shimmered beneath a pale sun, but below, the water carried the memory of loss. The ocean floor was bare and colorless, stripped of its vibrant life. Tiny bubbles of methane still rose from the depths, whispering of the violence that had passed. Volcanic ash lingered in the sky, tinting the sunlight in hues of rust and gold. It was a planet still catching its breath after catastrophe. Yet even in this silence, something was stirring. Life, fragile but unyielding, began to return. Small creatures crept through the shallows, feeding on whatever nutrients they could find. Algae bloomed again, painting the surface green and blue. Plankton drifted, delicate as dust, gathering sunlight and turning it into the first food of the new age. From these humble beginnings, the Triassic Ocean began to wake. It was a different kind of sea now. The water was warmer, thicker with minerals, and often starved of oxygen. Many regions were shallow and confined, enclosed by the fractured edges of the supercontinent Pangaea. Currents moved slowly, curling through narrow basins that glowed with heat and light. To some, it would have seemed inhospitable, a place where life struggled for every breath. But to evolution, it was an open canvas. The survivors that crawled back from extinction were not the same as those who had perished. The new ocean was a place for invention, a testing ground where life began to reshape itself. Tiny fish developed stronger gills and new ways to swim through heavy water. Ammonites, those coiled architects of the deep, returned with shells more elaborate than before, each spiral a fortress of survival. And somewhere along the coastline, where waves met the dry land, another kind of creature began to dream of the sea. They were reptiles, descendants of those that had once ruled the land. They had survived the extinction by seeking refuge in rivers and coastal swamps. But now, drawn by the abundance of food in the recovering shallows, they began to slip further from the shore. Each generation ventured deeper, staying longer underwater, learning to move with the current rather than against it. At first, they were awkward swimmers. Their limbs, still built for walking, pushed them forward with effort. But evolution is patient. Over time, bodies changed, bones hollowed, lungs grew larger, and tails began to flatten into tools for steering. Skin became smoother, less suited for heat and dryness, more for sliding through cool salt water. Slowly, these creatures began to belong to the sea. Among them were the first of their kind, names we know now only through the stone they left behind, Nothosaurus and Lariosaurus. They were not yet the giants that would come later, but they carried the promise of what was to be. Their bodies were sleek, with long necks and pointed snouts lined with sharp teeth for catching fish. Their limbs had become half fins, half feet, allowing them to glide through water, yet still haul themselves back onto land when needed. Imagine the coastlines of that time, shallow lagoons bathed in the orange light of a Triassic sunset, the air heavy with warmth, the sea calm and quiet, except for the ripple of these early swimmers moving just beneath the surface. Their shadows crossed the sand as they hunted in packs, twisting with elegant precision. Each movement was a step away from the land and a step closer to the mastery of the ocean. With them came new rhythms of life. Eggs were laid closer to water, and young learned to swim before they could walk. Predators and prey began to shape one another once again, setting into motion a chain of adaptation that would define the next 200 million years. Every heartbeat beneath the waves became part of a vast and growing experiment, one that would give rise to the most extraordinary forms the planet had ever seen. The ocean, once broken, was finding its balance again. The sun warmed its surface, and tiny organisms filled its depths with color and movement. Coral reefs began to rebuild in new shapes, spreading through the shallows like living mosaics. Schools of fish shimmered in the light, feeding on the endless drift of plankton. And above them, the reptiles glided with increasing confidence, no longer visitors but residents of this expanding blue world. This was the beginning of a new order. The Triassic Sea was not yet ruled by monsters, but the stage was being prepared for them. Each ripple, each breath, each small act of survival built the foundation for what was to come. From the stillness of extinction, the ocean had learned to breathe again, and in that breath, evolution found its rhythm, slow, steady, and unstoppable. The waters that had once been graves were now nurseries, and from their shimmering depths the next rulers of Earth were already taking shape. The world before the monsters was not empty after all. It was waiting quietly for their arrival. The new oceans had grown warm and welcoming, but beneath their glittering calm, life faced an impossible challenge. To return to the water was to leave behind everything that had once been familiar: solid ground, open air, and the steady pull of gravity. Yet, for some of the reptiles that lingered near the shores, the sea called with quiet persistence. It began not with ambition, but with small steps of chance. The coastlines of the Triassic world were crowded with opportunity, fish darting through tidal pools, soft bodied prey gliding just beyond reach. Some reptiles learned to wade deeper, chasing meals where the water rose higher around their bodies. The longer they stayed submerged, the more their bones, muscles, and senses began to adapt to the fluid world that surrounded them. Evolution is not a plan, it is a rhythm, a slow conversation between life and environment. And in those ancient shallows, that conversation grew more complex. The first generations that lingered in the water were clumsy, awkward in motion. Their lungs, built for brief gulps of air, struggled against the pull of depth. Their limbs, still shaped for walking, sliced unevenly through the waves. But each small success, each hunt completed, each meal earned, nudged their bodies toward new designs. Muscles reshaped, joints loosened, and bones thickened to balance buoyancy. Nature, ever patient, began to sculpt new forms from old blueprints. The air they breathed became their most precious link to the land. These early swimmers carried it inside them like treasure. They learned to rise gracefully, take a slow breath, and sink again into the dim green silence. Lungs stretched larger over time, able to hold each breath longer, feeding bodies that no longer needed to rest on solid ground. In their chest cavities, the shape of the ribs changed, becoming flexible enough to expand under the pressure of a deep dive. Limbs followed next. What had once been feet and claws grew wider, flatter, stronger. The angles of their joints shifted until the legs could move like paddles, sweeping through the water in rhythmic arcs. At first, they swam much like lizards, wriggling side to side. But soon, their tails began to play a greater role, growing longer, more muscular, and eventually more refined. Some tails ended in fins, guiding them through turns with the grace of ribbons. Others flattened into broad rudders, pushing them forward in steady, powerful strokes. It was a transformation both elegant and costly. To live in the sea meant giving up much of what once defined them. Eyes that had watched the dry world now learned to read a softer light. The air above and the water below refracted brightness in strange ways, blurring edges and bending color. Ears adapted too, not for the dry vibrations of air, but for the muted thrum of the deep. Sound in water carried faster and further, turning every splash, every heartbeat, into a message that could be felt through bone. The skin of these early pioneers began to change as well. Scales thinned, becoming smoother to cut through water with less drag. Some even developed a thin layer of fat beneath the surface, a small defense against temperature shifts. Warmth and movement replaced the stillness of basking. The rhythm of their lives became tied to currents, tides, and light, a new clock set by the turning of the sea. But this new life came with danger. In the water, escape was harder, and hiding was nearly impossible. The sea was filled with creatures that could move faster and strike from any direction. To survive, these reptiles had to learn precision, when to wait, when to burst forward, when to vanish into the shimmer of light above. The hunters that mastered patience thrived, and those that did not disappeared as quietly as they had appeared. Among the early swimmers, new shapes began to appear. Some, like the slender nothosaurs, relied on stealth, gliding close to the surface in search of unsuspecting prey. Others grew broader and heavier, trading speed for strength. Each shape carried an answer to the question of survival, and each was tested by the sea's endless challenges. To hunt underwater required balance between two worlds. These creatures still needed air, yet their prey lived entirely beneath the surface, so they learned a delicate rhythm, rising to breathe, diving to chase, and rising again. Fossils show how some species developed nostrils higher on their snouts, letting them breathe without fully breaking the surface. Others evolved eyes that faced slightly upward, giving them a clear view of both the dim water below and the thin silver ceiling above. Every adaptation was a risk, a gamble between success and extinction. Some experiments failed entirely, leaving no trace but fragments of bone and stone. Yet, from this restless trial and error, perfection slowly emerged. The sea rewarded those who could merge power and grace, lungs and patience, motion and stillness. Over millions of years, what began as hesitation became mastery. Reptiles that once feared the deep now danced through it with effortless poise. The coastline was no longer a border between worlds, but a passage. Evolution had gambled, and life had won its first great wager with the ocean. The surface of the Triassic seas rippled with quiet movement, shadows gliding beneath the sunlit water, their shapes half familiar, half alien. They were still learning what it meant to belong to the sea, but already the ocean was changing because of them. The age of land had given birth to the age of swimmers, and in their gentle, patient rhythm, the first true rulers of the water were being born. By the time the Triassic seas had settled into warmth and rhythm, evolution was ready to attempt something extraordinary. The coastlines were alive again with swimmers that had only recently learned to move with the grace of the water, their bodies caught between two worlds. Yet within this gentle chaos of forms, a new lineage began to appear, one that would perfect the art of living in the ocean so completely that the land would be nothing but a distant memory. They began small, unremarkable at first glance. Their ancestors had walked on land once, breathing air and crawling along riverbanks. But in these new oceans, their descendants no longer needed the shore. Bit by bit, generation after generation, their bodies changed until they became something entirely new. Their limbs became sleek paddles, their tails curved and strengthened, forming the shape of a crescent. Their skin grew smooth and rubbery, without the scales of their ancestors. And in time, they began to move, not with the twisting crawl of reptiles, but with the flowing rhythm of fish. They were the ichthyosaurs, the fish lizards, though the name is only a faint reflection of what they truly were. Nature had sculpted them into living arrows. Their design followed the same laws that would later shape the dolphins and whales, though those creatures were still hundreds of millions of years in the future. Their bodies told the story of physics made flesh. The long pointed snout cut through water with almost no resistance. The torpedo shape reduced drag to a whisper. Fins balanced their movement, while the tail's downward curve delivered power with every sweep. To watch them in their time would have been to see motion perfected, every line, every angle, every breath attuned to the sea itself. The ichthyosaurs ruled not through brute strength, but through mastery of motion. They did not ambush their prey from hiding like crocodiles, or strike from above like birds. They pursued, matching the pace of the swiftest fish, twisting and turning with precision that few predators before them had ever achieved. Their large eyes, among the biggest of any known animal, allowed them to see in dim light, chasing prey, even as the sunlight faded into the depths. Fossil evidence tells us they were warm-blooded, their bodies maintaining heat even in cooler waters. This gave them endurance, the ability to travel vast distances, to dive deep and rise again without tiring. In the still young world of the Triassic, they became the ocean's first true speed hunters. But the most remarkable thing about them was not their speed or power, it was what they carried within. In rocks that were once seabeds, paleontologists have found fossils of ichthyosaurs frozen in the act of giving birth. The mother's skeleton curves protectively around a tiny offspring, still halfway inside her. From that single moment captured in stone, we learned something profound. These creatures did not return to the shore to lay eggs. They gave birth in open water, their young born ready to swim. It meant they had cut their final tie to the land. The sea was no longer a place they visited, it was home. The implications of that change are immense. Once a species no longer needs the land, evolution can refine it purely for the water. The bones of the limbs shrank and fused, turning into solid paddles. The spine lengthened, allowing for the perfect side to side motion that powered their tails. The skulls became narrow and strong, each jaw armed with rows of pointed teeth that could pierce fish, squid, and even smaller reptiles. Some species hunted near the surface, darting after schools of fish, while others descended into darker waters where only the faintest glimmer of light reached. Over millions of years, they grew larger. Some evolved into sleek, agile hunters, only a few meters long. Others became giants. Among the most impressive was Shonosaurus, whose fossils were found high in the Nevada desert, a reminder that ancient seas once covered those mountains. This colossus stretched over 20 meters from snout to tail. Its eyes were the size of dinner plates, and its body moved with slow, steady power, gliding through the deep like a living submarine. Imagine the ocean then. Beneath the glowing surface, schools of ammonites drifted in shimmering spirals, their shells catching the light. Fish scattered in silver flashes as the shadow of an ichthyosaur passed above them. The silence of the deep broke only with the rush of displaced water as the predator lunged forward, jaws closing with a soft but final precision. In that moment, the ocean had its first true sovereign, a creature built not by imagination, but by the laws of motion and time. The ichthyosaurs thrived for more than 100 million years. They spread across every sea, adapting to every climate and depth. Their bones, now stone, lie scattered across cliffs and deserts, reminders of an age when the ocean itself seemed to breathe through them. Their rise marked a turning point in Earth's story. For the first time, a creature had become so perfectly adapted to life in the water that it no longer needed to look back toward the land. The gamble evolution had made in reshaping reptiles for the sea had paid off in full. In the quiet world beneath the Triassic sun, the ichthyosaurs glided through currents older than mountains, their movements effortless, their rule unchallenged. They were the first to show what the ocean could create when it was given time, patience, and the endless canvas of the deep. The ocean had found its balance again. After ages of chaos and rebuilding, the Triassic world was beginning to breathe in rhythm. The sun shone warmer, the seas calmed, and life began to grow bold once more. The age of experiment was giving way to an age of confidence. Creatures that had once been fragile survivors were now flourishing in vast numbers. Coral reefs spread across shallow shelves, their colors returning after long silence. Fish swam in endless schools that shimmered like mirrors beneath the surface. Ammonites spiraled through the water in clouds, their shells coiling tighter and more intricate with every generation. From the quiet shallows to the dark blue of the open sea, life had become a tapestry of movement, and into this world of abundance, evolution began to reach for scale. The seas that had once been empty now carried giants. Among the first of these was Shonosaurus, a titan of the ichthyosaur line, and one of the largest animals ever to swim in the Triassic seas. Its bones, now found in the cliffs of Nevada, tell of a creature that could stretch beyond 20 meters in length. Its body was sleek and powerful, shaped by the same invisible rules of water and motion that would later craft whales. It moved with slow confidence, each beat of its crescent tail driving it forward with quiet authority. Not far behind in size and strength were others, like Simbaspondylus, with long jaws and deep chests built for strength rather than speed. These early leviathans roamed oceans that were still young, gliding through warmth and light where the continents of the world were only beginning to drift apart. Their size was not a matter of chance, it was a response, a solution to the new challenges of the sea. In an ocean without limits, where predators and prey could roam vast distances, scale became both shield and weapon. To grow large was to become harder to catch, harder to kill, and better suited for the endless search for food. The physics of water rewarded those who could glide farther for less effort. Large bodies moved efficiently, conserving energy as they crossed entire seas in pursuit of the great swarms of ammonites and fish. A small creature had to beat its fins constantly to survive. A giant could drift, resting in the current, its slow rhythm matched to the turning of the planet. Inside these vast bodies, nature worked new miracles. Massive lungs allowed for deeper dives and longer journeys beneath the surface. Warm blood, sustained by constant motion, kept them alive even when waters cooled. Strong hearts drove oxygen through muscles that never stopped moving. Every pulse of blood carried with it the memory of the land they had once left behind, now transformed for the endless blue. All around them, the oceans grew richer. Ammonites, with their curled shells and trailing tentacles, drifted in glittering fields. Early fish darted through shoals that moved as one, their bodies catching the sun in quick flashes. Cephalopods hovered in the dim light, their eyes large and curious, their tentacles weaving through the currents like ribbons. It was a living mosaic, a sea alive with color, motion, and purpose. But abundance brings competition, and where there is competition, evolution begins to sharpen its tools. Prey learned to grow thicker shells, or to move in larger groups where safety lay in numbers. Some ammonites developed ribs and spines along their coils, intricate armor against crushing jaws. Fish grew faster, more agile, capable of darting between shadows in the blink of an eye. The cephalopods, clever and quick, began to rely on ink, darkness, and deception. The predators answered in kind. The ichthyosaurs' teeth grew sharper, their vision more refined. Their tails evolved into stronger fins, allowing bursts of speed that could close the distance in moments. Even their intelligence shifted, shaped by the demands of hunting quick, thinking prey. The ocean had become a place where every advantage was temporary, and every adaptation invited a counter. This was the beginning of the great underwater arms race, a quiet struggle that would define the seas for millions of years to come. Every shell, every muscle, every flicker of movement was part of a larger dance between survival and hunger. In the deep waters, far from the sunlight, the rules were harsher still. Here the giants had no landmarks, no coral reefs or shorelines to guide them, only the pull of gravity, the cold of depth, and the faint silver glow from above. Yet they thrived there too. Symbospondylus and its kin hunted in the twilight zones, where smaller creatures fled the surface light. Their eyes, vast and sensitive, could catch even the faintest shimmer of motion. Their bodies, built for endurance, let them rise and fall through layers of darkness that few animals could endure. And so the Triassic seas entered their golden age. The world's oceans, once scarred by extinction, now pulsed with vitality. Every layer of water, from the glittering shallows to the black deep, was alive with purpose. The giants that ruled it were not monsters, but masterpieces, proof of life's ability to rebuild itself stronger, faster, and stranger than before. The surface of the sea in that time would have looked serene, but beneath it lay a silent contest of power and elegance. The great predators glided through currents carved by their own weight. The prey below shimmered and vanished in waves of movement. And as the world shifted from the Triassic into the Jurassic, this quiet balance would deepen. The age of giants had only just begun, and the ocean was ready to see how far life could take its promise. For now the waters were calm, filled with the steady rhythm of giants breathing beneath the sun. The world never stands still. Even when it seems calm, even when the horizon feels eternal, The ground beneath it is always in motion. Deep below the surface, heat and gravity work in quiet patience, pushing continents apart grain by grain, heartbeat by heartbeat. By the middle of the Triassic, this slow, unseen force began to reshape the planet once again. The great supercontinent known as Pangaea, which had held almost all land together in a single vast expanse, started to crack. Fissures opened where molten rock pressed upward, and the land began to stretch, groan, and drift. What had once been one enormous landmass started to divide into separate pieces, and with that fracture came something entirely new: the birth of oceans. At first, these newborn seas were narrow and shallow, winding like long fingers between continents. They filled slowly, collecting the warmth of the sun and the minerals carried from eroding cliffs. Over time, they deepened, spreading their waters farther and farther until the surface of the earth began to shimmer with new coastlines. Bays became gulfs, gulfs became straits, and soon the face of the planet was transformed. These changing boundaries created habitats unlike any that had existed before. Where land had once been endless desert, salt water now touched the edges of forests. Tides rose and fell along new shores, sculpting mudflats rich with nutrients. Coral polyps began to grow in the shallows, building the first reefs since the Great Dying had erased them millions of years earlier. Slowly, color returned to the world's edges. The seas that spread through these fractures were warm, filled with minerals that poured from volcanic vents and newly exposed rock. The sunlight reached easily through their clear surfaces, creating perfect conditions for life to bloom. Tiny plankton multiplied, painting the water with green and gold. They became the foundation of a growing food web, feeding countless small creatures that floated and swam in endless motion. And as the microscopic world flourished, so too did everything that depended on it. The oceans grew crowded once more, but this time with greater variety than ever before. Ammonites filled the middle depths in glittering clouds. Fish, shaped by 100 million years of trial and refinement, swam through coral forests in dazzling patterns. Crustaceans scuttled over the seafloor, cleaning the world's leftovers with quiet efficiency. The air above these seas thickened with moisture, carrying salt and warmth across the newly forming continents. Continental drift did more than divide the land. It created new patterns of current, each one stirring nutrients from the deep and carrying them across vast distances. These currents acted like invisible rivers, connecting ecosystems that had never before met. Life traveled with them, drifting eggs, floating spores, small creatures carried by chance. The ocean became a single, moving network of exchange. With every movement of the continents, the climate shifted. The interiors of the drifting lands grew dry, while the coasts remained humid and alive. Rain fell more often near the new seas, carving rivers that fed the growing deltas. Along those deltas, layers of sand and silt settled, creating rich nurseries for life. What began as slow geological drift had turned into a global invitation for diversity. The first great coral ecosystems of this new world began to rise in these shallow seas. Built from colonies of tiny organisms, each reef was a city of life, buzzing with color and motion. Small fish hid among the coral branches, while predators glided above them in silent patrols. Starfish crept across the surface, feeding in slow spirals. Every inch of these reefs was alive, breathing, and changing with the tides. Further offshore, the deep waters belonged to larger shapes. The ichthyosaurs still reigned, joined now by even newer forms of marine reptiles. But these giants, though powerful, were no longer alone. The ocean had become vast enough to hold multitudes, each adapted to a different layer, a different rhythm. Some lived in the warmth of the surface, where sunlight danced. Others preferred the cooler shadows below, where the world was quieter and slower. The splitting of Pangaea also meant isolation. As continents drifted apart, species began to evolve in separate corners of the globe, shaped by their unique seas. In one region, reefs grew taller and denser. In another, currents stayed cooler, favoring creatures of endurance over speed. The Earth was learning variation, experimenting with form and balance. And yet, through all of this, there was harmony. The movement of the continents, the swirling of the currents, the birth of new oceans, together they formed a single rhythm. The planet was alive, reshaping itself, giving rise to new ways for life to thrive. Inland, far from the open seas, vast bodies of water began to appear. These inland seas stretched across what is now Europe and North America, their calm surfaces reflecting the sun like glass. They were shallower than the open ocean, but rich in nutrients and oxygen. Life there took on smaller, more specialized forms. Plants rooted in the silt, filter feeders floated near the surface, and small predators wove among them like silver threads. These inland worlds acted as laboratories of evolution, each one testing new shapes and strategies for survival. From these waters would one day emerge the ancestors of creatures yet unimagined, beings that would redefine what it meant to live in the sea. But for now, the world was still finding its balance. The continents drifted apart like slow-moving clouds, and the oceans that filled the gaps shimmered with promise. The earth had opened itself once more, dividing to create abundance. From the quiet fracture of Pangaea came the soundless beginning of a new age, one where the seas no longer separated the world, but stitched it together through motion, warmth, and life. The oceans had grown calm again. The giants of the earlier ages still ruled the open seas, but the world beneath them was changing once more. New coastlines had formed, new currents had begun to stir, and with them came the quiet unfolding of a different kind of predator. Where the ichthyosaurs had been built for speed and distance, this new lineage was something else entirely. Stranger, slower perhaps, but elegant in a way that defied reason. From the shallows of the Jurassic world, the Plesiosaurs began to rise. At first glance, they must have looked like creatures from a dream. Their bodies were broad and smooth, ending in four great flippers that cut through the water with a rhythm unlike anything that had ever existed. Their necks stretched impossibly long, arching with the poise of serpents, while their heads were small and refined, armed with sharp, interlocking teeth. They moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, as if the ocean itself had learned to glide. Fossils tell us they began their story in the aftermath of the ichthyosaurs' long reign. Evolution, ever curious, began experimenting once again with shape and movement. The plesiosaurs were the result of that grand experiment, reptiles that had taken to the sea not through mimicry of fish, but through invention. Where ichthyosaurs had imitated the swift bodies of dolphins, the plesiosaurs became something altogether new. Their four flippers worked in harmony, each one powerful and flexible. Together, they created a motion that was neither the steady undulation of fish nor the sweeping strokes of whales. Instead, they flew through the water. Their flippers moved in graceful, alternating beats, much like the wings of a bird or the fins of a turtle, lifting and gliding through dense liquid as if it were air. It was a form of motion unseen before in the history of life, an underwater ballet of balance and precision. To see one alive would have been like watching a dream glide past. The sunlight above would ripple across its back, and the slow movement of its flippers would send spirals of light through the water. Its neck would weave and bend, tracing curves through the current as it hunted for prey that had no time to flee. There was no hurry in its pursuit, only patience, as if time itself moved differently around it. Not all plesiosaurs shared the same design. Evolution took their blueprint and shaped it into two distinct forms. Some became long-necked and slender, their bodies built for grace rather than brute power. These were the gentle hunters, the silent stalkers of fish and squid. Their necks could stretch far into shoals, striking with precision before retreating to swallow their catch whole. Others went in the opposite direction, growing shorter and more compact. Their skulls became massive, their jaws thick with muscle and lined with teeth meant for crushing. These were the pliosaurs, the bone breakers of the sea, who could shatter shells and tear through the armor of any creature that crossed their path. Between them, the plesiosaurs claimed the ocean's middle depths. They did not chase prey across great distances like the ichthyosaurs, nor did they linger in the shallows like smaller reptiles. They belonged to the open water, where sunlight faded but the sea still held life in abundance. Their mastery of movement carried them far. Fossils have been found on every continent, from England's chalk cliffs to the deserts of South America, even in the highlands of Antarctica where ice now rules. These bones, scattered across the world, tell of a species that thrived everywhere the sea reached. They swam from coast to coast, their migrations guided by the seasons, following the pulse of the ocean itself. Some fossil beds show groups of plesiosaurs preserved together, their bodies aligned in a way that suggests they may have traveled in pods, much like modern whales. If that is true, then their world was not one of isolation, but of community, a rhythm of shared motion across the deep. The sea may have seemed endless, but they crossed it as if it were home, their long necks rising and falling in unison beneath the sunlit waves. Their rise changed everything beneath the surface. Fish that had once swum freely now faced a new kind of hunter, one that could strike from unexpected angles. Ammonites developed new defenses, their shells thickening with spines and ridges. Even the giant ichthyosaurs, once unchallenged, began to fade from dominance. The plesiosaurs had brought something different to the ocean, not just strength or size, but elegance refined into efficiency. In their motion, there was no waste, no noise, only perfection. Every beat of their flippers was balanced against the next. Every curve of their bodies followed the flow of water as though they were born from it. The sea had created predators that seemed to embody its own nature, vast, serene, and endlessly patient. For nearly 130 million years, the plesiosaurs would endure, adapting as the world around them shifted and fractured again. They would survive changes in sea levels, volcanic winters, and the birth of new species. Wherever there was water, they would glide, their shadows stretching across the ocean floor. They were not monsters, though their size and shape might have inspired such thoughts in those who would one day unearth them. They were the ocean made flesh, a reminder that evolution's greatest art often lies not in ferocity, but in grace. In the long history of life's return to the sea, the plesiosaurs marked a moment of quiet triumph. The return of fear, yes, but also the perfection of movement, born from the endless patience of water and time. By the time the Jurassic seas reached their greatest expanse, the world below had changed once again. The long-necked plesiosaurs still moved through the calm shallows like drifting ribbons of light, graceful and patient in their hunts. But far below, in deeper water, another shape was rising. It was heavier, faster, and far more violent. Where the long-necked hunters relied on precision, these new predators ruled through raw power. They were the pliosaurs, the short-necked giants of the ocean. Everything about them spoke of strength. Their necks, once elegant and flexible, had shortened into thick columns of muscle built for sudden bursts of motion. Their heads grew enormous, their skulls stretching more than 2 meters in length, packed with bone and sinew strong enough to shatter anything they caught. The long, narrow jaws of their ancestors were replaced by weapons designed for destruction. Each tooth curved backward like a dagger, meant to pierce and hold. Their eyes, set deep in the skull, were wide and forward-facing, giving them depth and focus for fast-moving prey. Their bodies were compact and muscular, built for speed and impact. Four great flippers drove them through the water with the force of underwater wings, each stroke propelling them faster than anything else in their realm. Unlike the long-necked forms that glided with slow rhythm, the Pliosaurs moved like torpedoes, swift and deliberate. They were hunters made to chase, strike, and end. Among them, a few became legends. The name Liopleurodon drifts through time like a whisper of awe. Its skull alone could stretch longer than the height of a person. Its jaw could open wide enough to engulf a prey animal whole, and when it closed, the force was unimaginable. The bones of its victims, when found, are crushed and splintered, their shapes barely recognizable. Its body was sleek and dark, its flippers beating in perfect sync as it darted after fish, ammonites, and even other marine reptiles. Another, giant, Kronosaurus, lived later in the early Cretaceous seas that covered what is now Australia. Its name was fitting, borrowed from the god who devoured his own children. The fossils show a skull so massive it could have reached 3 meters from snout to crest, its jaws lined with thick, conical teeth the size of human hands. With one bite, it could crush through bone or shell with ease. These were not creatures of silent grace. They were storms made flesh, sudden flashes of power in the calm blue depths. A single pliosaur could drive through a school of fish, scattering them like falling leaves. Their tails whipped behind them as they turned, the muscles beneath their smooth skin flexing in waves of energy. Every movement carried the weight of purpose, the single-minded pursuit of dominance. The fossil record gives us glimpses of their world, frozen moments that hint at their ferocity. Ammonite shells crushed into spirals, jawbones of smaller reptiles with punctures deep and clean. Sometimes, even the bones of other pliosaurs bear the marks of teeth identical to their own. It suggests something darker, a truth that repeats throughout nature's history, that competition at the top has no mercy. Cannibalism among apex predators is not unusual. In times of hunger or rivalry, one pliosaur may have turned on another. The seas were vast, but not infinite. Every coast, every reef, every fertile hunting ground belonged to someone, and these hunters would have defended their ranges with terrible precision. Perhaps two of them met by chance, drawn by the same scent of blood. They circled each other in silence before lunging, jaws clashing, water exploding around them. One would win, the other would sink, and the sea would swallow both story and sound. In these battles, strength was not the only advantage. Their intelligence, though alien to us, must have been sharp. Their eyes tracked movement with calculating patience, and their timing was perfect. Like sharks or orcas of the modern world, they understood the rhythm of the hunt, when to pursue, when to wait, and when to strike. Their power was never wasted. To the creatures of the Jurassic seas, the pliosaurs were not simply predators. They were the fear that moved unseen, the shadow that turned the calmest waters into places of dread. Even other large reptiles kept their distance. A passing silhouette, a sudden shift in the current, might have been the only warning before a flash of teeth ended everything. Yet, within this violence, there was beauty in their design. The symmetry of their flippers, the curve of their skulls, the way light played across their bodies as they passed beneath the surface, all spoke of evolution's careful hand. Every muscle, every line, every bone existed for one purpose, yet none were wasteful. The pliosaurs were living proof that strength could also be art. They ruled the seas for millions of years, spreading across the globe as the continents drifted further apart. Their fossils have been found in England, South America, and Australia, marking the reach of creatures that once crossed entire oceans. In the layers of rock, their bones rest beside those of their prey, locked forever in the stillness that follows chaos. Eventually, the tides of time would move past them, as they always do. But for that long, glittering age, the Pliosaurs held dominion over the depths. Their jaws were the final judgment of the Jurassic seas, their presence a constant reminder that in the balance of life, fear too has its place. And when the sunlight shimmered on the open water, far above, perhaps the faintest shadow passed below, wide, dark, and ancient, before fading again into the quiet blue. Far beneath the surface, where sunlight fades into endless blue, another world begins. The waves above seem calm, yet below them lies a quiet vastness untouched by warmth or color. It is a place where pressure builds like invisible stone, and the light of day dissolves into silence. In the ancient seas, this realm was not empty. It belonged to those who had learned to see where others were blind, to move where others could not survive. Among the great reptiles that ruled the Mesozoic oceans, a few dared to venture into this deep and shadowed world. They were the deep-sea hunters, creatures whose bodies had been reshaped by time and necessity. At the heart of this hidden world swam the Ichthyosaurs, already masters of motion. But while many hunted near the light, one kind had followed its instincts further into the dark. Its name was Ophthalmosaurus, meaning eye lizard, a title it earned honestly. Its eyes were enormous, among the largest of any creature to ever live, as wide as a dinner plate, so large that they dominated the skull. Fossil skulls reveal rings of bone that once held these eyes in place, strong enough to resist the crushing pressure of the depths. Through those enormous orbs, Ophthalmosaurus could see what no other predator could, the faintest flicker of movement in a world where the sun could not reach. To imagine its world is to descend slowly through color. The bright greens and blues of the surface soften to turquoise, then to indigo, then to black. The cold wraps tighter with every meter down, and sound replaces sight as the main language of the sea. Here, in the midwater twilight, Ophthalmosaurus glided like a shadow among shadows, chasing flashes of silver and white that only it could detect. Its body was sleek, like a living torpedo. Its snout was narrow and filled with fine teeth, perfect for catching fish and squid that darted through the dark. Unlike the heavier pliosaurs that crushed their prey in bone-breaking bites, Ophthalmosaurus was a pursuer of the quick and the fleeting. Its flippers beat with gentle rhythm, each movement measured and fluid, conserving energy for the long dives it made in silence. Scientists believe it could stay underwater for long stretches, its lungs filling with air before it plunged into the deep. Oxygen was stored not only in its lungs, but in its blood and muscles, a living reservoir built for endurance. Modern whales share the same secret, though they would not appear on Earth until tens of millions of years later. Nature had already written the blueprint. Down there, beneath the sunlit layers, there was no place for color. The skin of deep-sea reptiles was likely dark, smooth, and reflective, blending into the gloom. Their hearts beat slowly, conserving every breath. Their movements were measured and precise, for in the deep, mistakes were rarely forgiven. The prey of this world was as strange as its hunters. Ancient squid, soft-bodied and fast, drifted through the dark with long tentacles trailing like ribbons. Fish with light-producing organs glowed faintly in the blackness, their bodies pulsing with blue-green flickers. The deep ocean of the Jurassic was not empty, only hidden, a stage lit by the faintest sparks of life, and into this quiet theater came the Ophthalmosaurus, silent as a falling shadow. It followed its prey by sight when it could, by sound and vibration when it could not. Its enormous eyes captured the last whispers of light, and when there was none, its senses filled the silence. One flick of its tail, one subtle turn, and the chase began. The squid darted, releasing clouds of ink that vanished almost instantly in the dark. The ichthyosaur turned, corrected, and struck with precision born of millions of years of refinement. A flash of teeth, a ripple of motion, and the sea returned to stillness. In these depths, where few creatures dared to hunt, Ophthalmosaurus reigned unchallenged. Even the great Pliosaurs of the surface rarely descended so far, for their heavy bodies were built for bursts of power, not for the patience of the deep. Down here, strength meant nothing without silence. Survival favored the quiet, the enduring, the unseen. The physiology of these deep divers tells us something profound about the oceans themselves. The world beneath the waves is not one place but many, each layer with its own kind of light and life. The upper ocean glows with energy and color, a realm of constant motion. But as you move downward, everything slows. Pressure mounts, sound thickens. Life becomes specialized, rare, and deliberate. And yet, even there, life finds a way to flourish. The deep ocean is Earth's oldest and most enduring habitat. It has witnessed every extinction, every upheaval, and still it endures, its silence broken only by the movements of those who call it home. The deep-sea hunters of the Jurassic were among the first to conquer it. They mapped its invisible landscape with instinct and motion, finding food where others found only emptiness. In doing so, they opened a new chapter in evolution, one where sight reached beyond light and endurance replaced speed. When we look at their fossils now, their wide eyes stare back through millions of years, glassy and unblinking. They remind us that even in the darkest places on Earth, there has always been life, patient and tireless, waiting in the quiet. And if you could drift there now, far below the modern sea, you might still sense their presence, the pulse of ancient motion, the whisper of flippers in the dark, the last memory of the creatures who once ruled the depths where no sun could shine. Every ocean has a rhythm, an invisible pattern that connects the smallest drifting cell to the largest moving shadow. It is a web spun not from silk, but from hunger and survival, a balance of taking and giving that keeps the sea alive. During the Mesozoic era, when reptiles ruled the waters, that balance was as intricate as it is today, though the players were far different. Fossils, locked in stone and silence, have given us a way to glimpse it again. If you look closely at a limestone slab from that time, you might find the spiral of an ammonite pressed within it, a perfect coil preserved across millions of years. These shells, beautiful and endless in form, once drifted in great swarms through the open sea. They were cephalopods, close kin to modern squids and octopuses, and they filled the role that fish often do today. They were the foundation of the marine food web, not at the very bottom, but near its heart, serving as both predator and prey in equal measure. Ammonites hunted tiny plankton and smaller crustaceans, their soft bodies tucked safely inside the chambers of their shells. But in turn, almost everything larger hunted them. In the stomachs of ichthyosaurs, in the rib cages of pliosaurs, and even in the teeth marks of early sharks, their remains are found again and again. Their shells, often shattered or bitten through, tell quiet stories of pursuit and escape that ended long before our species began. The ocean in those ages was a living puzzle. Above the ammonites swam schools of fish that shimmered in tight formation, quick and alert. Among them, smaller reptiles darted and weaved, chasing and being chased in endless exchange. On the seafloor, scavengers picked at the remains that drifted down from the battles above, crabs, snails, and early sea stars, cleaning the world of its leftovers. Higher still, in the open blue, the great predators hunted in circuits that may have lasted days or weeks, The long-necked plesiosaurs swept through schools of fish-like nets, plucking individuals with quiet precision. The pliosaurs, larger and faster, struck with thunderous power, seizing anything they could overpower. Above them, the ichthyosaurs glided like living arrows, chasing shoals of squid through the shallows and twilight depths. Each creature depended on another. Every act of feeding shaped the next. It was a circle of motion, an unending exchange of energy that kept the sea from collapsing into stillness. And within that circle, balance was everything. When the prey multiplied too quickly, the hunters grew stronger, faster, and more numerous. When predators dominated, the smaller creatures rebounded in their absence. The ocean, though vast, had always been self-correcting. Its rules were written in movement and silence, not in words. At the very base of this vast web were the smallest lives of all, the plankton. They were invisible to the giants that swam above them, yet everything depended on their existence. These microscopic drifters filled the sunlight zones of the sea, capturing energy from the sun and the minerals that seeped from the continents. They formed the foundation of every meal, every life, every breath taken beneath the waves. The abundance of plankton dictated the strength of everything above. When they flourished, the seas grew alive with fish, ammonites, and predators. When they dwindled, famine rippled upward through the food web, and the ocean grew quiet. In layers of ancient rock, scientists can still trace the rise and fall of these tiny organisms. The chemical signatures left behind in sediments tell us when the seas were full of life and when they struggled. Each layer is a record of ocean productivity, written in calcium and carbon, whispering of times when the planet flourished and times when it nearly died. Extinction, when it came, often began with something small, a shift in temperature, a change in ocean currents, a drop in oxygen that made the water less welcoming. Plankton declined first, their numbers shrinking in the shallows. Then the ammonites, dependent on them for food, began to vanish. With them went the hunters that relied on their swarming abundance. The balance was fragile, yet remarkably resilient. Even after the greatest losses, life always found a way to return. New species of plankton emerged, followed by new prey, and finally, new predators to claim their place. The ocean rebuilt itself in cycles of destruction and rebirth, each wave of life shaped by what had come before. If you could stand on a cliff above one of those ancient seas, you would see none of this pattern directly. You would only see the glittering surface, calm and unbroken. But beneath it, the invisible web was always moving, plankton rising and falling with the light, ammonites spiraling through their endless migrations, and predators gliding in patient pursuit. In the stillness of the fossil record, the motion has stopped, yet the connections remain. Every shell, every tooth, every ripple in the stone is part of that great pattern, the proof that life, no matter how strange or fleeting, has always been bound by the same quiet rule. Even in a world filled with monsters, the ocean was never ruled by power alone. It was ruled by balance, by the silent exchange between light and darkness, between growth and hunger, a balance so delicate that the fall of a single species could ripple outward for centuries, yet so enduring that, through all of Earth's upheavals, it never truly broke. And so, through fossils and time, we can still trace that invisible web, the memory of a sea alive with color and movement, where every life, from the smallest drifting cell to the largest reptile, played its part in the song of survival. As the Jurassic seas deepened and filled with life, the world beneath the waves became a place of endless competition. The great ichthyosaurs had perfected speed, the plesiosaurs had mastered grace, the pliosaurs ruled through strength and power. Yet, even with these giants in command, evolution had one more surprise to release into the water, a creature that should have belonged to the rivers and swamps, but instead chose the open sea. They were crocodiles, but not as we know them. Their ancestors had lived in the shallows and on the edges of rivers, hunting fish and small reptiles along the muddy banks. They had long bodies, strong tails, and jaws filled with teeth like blades, but some among them began to drift further from the land. They stayed longer in the salt water, chasing fish that shimmered just beyond the waves. Each generation spent more time there, and each step carried them farther from the shore until, at last, they belonged entirely to the sea. These were the metriorhynchids, the crocodiles that became fish. Unlike their land-dwelling cousins, they could no longer crawl or bask. Their limbs had become flippers, flattened and muscular, perfect for slicing through water. Their tails grew into long, curved fins with a crescent-shaped fluke at the end that acted like a rudder. From the tip of their snout to the tip of their tail, their bodies were shaped for motion, smooth and streamlined, with no armor of heavy scales to slow them down. They were built not for stillness, but for pursuit. Their skulls were narrow and pointed, designed for speed rather than strength. The teeth along their jaws were fine and sharp, ideal for gripping slippery prey. Some had snouts nearly a meter long, their mouths filled with interlocking fangs that could pierce through the silver flash of a fish or the soft body of a squid. When they swam, their movements were effortless, the tail sweeping side to side in perfect rhythm as the flippers guided them through turns and dives. In this form, they looked almost nothing like the crocodiles of today. Their eyes were large and forward-facing, giving them the precision of a true predator. Their skin was smooth and thin, more like that of a dolphin than a reptile. Fossilized impressions show that they even had skin textures that reduced drag, an innovation that nature would later repeat in sharks, whales, and penguins. But perhaps the most remarkable adaptation was one that cannot be seen in bone. The metriorhynchids had developed salt glands, small organs that allowed them to drink seawater and expel the excess salt through their noses. This single change freed them from the need to return to freshwater rivers, giving them full independence in the ocean. They could roam far from shore, crossing entire seas without ever touching land. Some species even evolved to give birth to live young, another gift of adaptation to the open water. Fossilized embryos found within adult skeletons tell us that they carried their young inside them, just as ichthyosaurs and later whales would do. The need for beaches or nesting grounds was gone. Every part of their life, from birth to death, belonged to the sea. The metriorhynchids were not as large as the great Pliosaurs or Mosasaurs that would come later, but what they lacked in size, they made up for in diversity. Some were sleek and fast, built for chasing fish in open water. Others were heavier, with shorter jaws for crushing shells and hard-bodied prey. A few species developed crests along their heads, perhaps for display or hydrodynamic balance. Each was a variation on a theme, the sea reimagining the crocodile again and again. They lived alongside the plesiosaurs, sharing the same hunting grounds without replacing them. Where the plesiosaurs glided and turned in graceful loops, the metriorhynchids darted and twisted in quick bursts of speed. Their smaller size allowed them to navigate tighter spaces, coral reefs, shallow lagoons, and the edges of underwater cliffs. In these places, they thrived, filling the ecological roles that the larger reptiles could not. The fossils of these ancient marine crocodiles have been found across Europe, South America, and even as far as Chile, where entire skeletons were preserved in stone. They show that metriorhynchids spread across nearly every sea of the Jurassic world. For more than 30 million years, they were among the ocean's most efficient hunters. And yet, despite their success, they would one day vanish quietly. As the seas changed and new predators rose, their lineage faded into extinction, leaving only their distant cousins behind, the crocodiles that still haunt our rivers and coastlines today. But for a time, long before whales and sharks ruled the water, these creatures were the sea's silent architects of speed. They proved that even the most earthbound of animals could learn to master the deep. Imagine one gliding beneath the surface, the sunlight scattering across its back as it rises through the water. Its silhouette looks almost like that of a shark, its movements smooth and practiced. It exhales softly, releasing a faint cloud of bubbles, and dives again into the blue, vanishing as if the ocean itself had shaped it from light and motion. For millions of years, these forgotten crocodiles swam through the same waters that once held ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, keeping pace with the tides of change. They were not the largest, nor the fiercest, but they were among the most remarkable, reptiles that answered the ocean's invitation and, in doing so, became part of its design. The metriorhynchids are long gone now, but in every sleek swimmer that cuts through the water today, there is a trace of their legacy. They were the proof that the sea, patient and eternal, can transform even the creatures of land into something entirely its own. The ocean, which had once moved in slow and steady rhythms, began to quicken its pace. Life, always in motion, was starting to think faster, move faster, and fight harder. Across the ancient seas, a quiet revolution was taking place, not in sound or chaos, but in design. Every creature, from the smallest drifting shell to the largest predator, was changing. The balance between hunter and hunted had reached a fragile perfection, and evolution began to push both sides into new forms of ingenuity. What had once been a simple chase became an arms race written into the bones and shells of every creature beneath the waves. Predators became swifter, their bodies more streamlined and precise. Ichthyosaurs, once elegant gliders, grew faster and sharper, built for pursuit rather than patience. The Plesiosaurs refined their underwater flight, their four flippers beating in perfect rhythm. Even the marine crocodiles, those sleek metriorhynchids that swam with the confidence of sharks, began to sharpen their senses, their eyes and snouts tuned to the faintest ripple of motion. But as the hunters improved, so too did their prey. The small, soft-bodied creatures that had once floated helplessly in the water began to fight back in quiet, clever ways. Fish developed new scales, smoother and stronger, shimmering armor against the teeth that pursued them. Some evolved tails that could propel them in sudden bursts of speed, allowing them to vanish into the blue with a flick of muscle. Others turned to defense. Shells became thicker, tougher, coiled tighter around the fragile lives inside. The ammonites, which had long ruled the middle of the food web, began to evolve in dazzling patterns. Some shells twisted into intricate spirals, while others sprouted ridges and spines. It was beauty born from fear, the art of survival sculpted by millions of years of pursuit. Even the seafloor was changing. Creatures that once drifted lazily on the sand learned to dig, burrow, and hide. Clams and crustaceans sank themselves deeper into the sediment, escaping the jaws that searched above. The ocean's surface, once dominated by drifting life, now held a secret world beneath, one built of tunnels and shadows where danger could pass unseen. But not all defenses were armor or speed. Some were far more inventive. The invertebrates of the Mesozoic seas, creatures like squid and octopuses, began to reveal a different kind of power, intelligence. The cephalopods, with their soft bodies and quick minds, turned the art of survival into strategy. They developed eyes that could see in dim light, skin that could shift color in a heartbeat, and tentacles that could grasp, test, and learn. In a world where so many creatures fought with strength, they fought with thought. Their nervous systems grew more complex, their instincts more adaptive. They could change direction in an instant, blend into coral or shadow, and remember what had chased them before. For the first time, the ocean had thinkers. Elsewhere, other creatures turned danger into chemistry. Sea urchins and some early mollusks began to produce toxins, quiet, invisible weapons that could paralyze or repel attackers. Coral colonies built sharper skeletons, their polyps secreting harder calcium structures that could resist both teeth and time. The ocean, once soft and yielding, was becoming a place of edges, armor, and counterattack. Scientists would later call this moment the Mesozoic Marine Revolution, though it did not arrive all at once. It was not a single event, but a rising tide of transformation that swept across tens of millions of years. Bit by bit, the rules of survival rewrote themselves. No longer was it enough to be large, or fast, or strong. The ocean demanded innovation, and life responded with a creativity that reshaped everything that swam, crawled, or drifted within it. Even the smallest creatures, the plankton and algae that filled the upper layers of sunlight, were drawn into this new rhythm. As the food web above them grew more complex, they multiplied and diversified, feeding the growing chains of life. The sea became more productive, its currents rich with nutrients stirred by the movement of continents and the turning of seasons. This abundance fueled the revolution, driving evolution to move ever faster. With each passing age, the ocean became louder with life. Coral reefs spread like living cities, layered with color and motion. Fish swam in coordinated schools, using confusion as defense. Shellfish grew new shapes, new spikes, new colors. Every adaptation invited another, every innovation demanded a reply. And through it all, the predators followed, refining their senses, their speed, and their cunning. Some learned to hunt in packs, others to wait in stillness. In the silence of the deep, everything was changing, one heartbeat at a time. When we look at the oceans today, the patterns that began in that ancient age still linger. The quick reflex of a fish, avoiding a strike, the clever camouflage of an octopus, the sharp edges of coral, all are echoes of that long, quiet revolution. The Mesozoic seas became the model for every ocean that followed. They taught life that survival was not just a matter of endurance, but of imagination. The age of giants had given the world its power, but it was the age of adaptation, this invisible race between hunter and prey, that gave it its depth. In the calm beneath the waves, evolution had found its finest laboratory, and from that slow, endless experiment came the world we still see today, an ocean alive with intelligence, color, and the eternal dance between life and hunger. By the time the world entered the Cretaceous, the oceans had grown warmer and wider than ever before. The continents had drifted far apart, reshaping the face of the planet into new coastlines and deepening seas. What had once been narrow basins and inland waters now stretched into vast open oceans that shimmered beneath the golden light of a changing sun. These were seas of abundance, filled with life in every corner, from drifting plankton and coiled ammonites to graceful reptiles gliding in silence through blue eternity. The great ichthyosaurs that once ruled these waters had vanished. The Plesiosaurs and Pliosaurs still held their places among the waves, their long necks and powerful fins cutting through the surf. But nature, as always, was restless. It was ready to crown a new ruler, and this time, the ocean's conqueror would rise not from the deep, but from the land. It began along the shores, in warm, shallow lagoons, where ancient monitor lizards hunted fish among the reeds. These were creatures already skilled in water, able to swim with their tails and hold their breath as they waited for prey to pass. Over time, they stayed longer beneath the surface. Their legs began to flatten, their tails to stretch and flex. Their ribs widened to hold larger lungs, and their bodies took on the shape of something meant not just to swim, but to thrive in the open sea. Evolution, once again, had found a new way to master the ocean. From these modest beginnings emerged the Mosasaurs, a lineage of reptiles that would soon become the dominant predators of the Cretaceous world. They were distant relatives of today's monitor lizards and snakes, though far larger and far more formidable. Unlike the reptiles that came before them, the Mosasaurs were not simply adapted to the water, they belonged to it completely. Their bodies were long and muscular, built for both speed and control. Four strong flippers replaced their limbs, each one guiding their immense bulk through the live currents with precision. Their tails, powerful and crescent-shaped, worked like the fins of a shark, propelling them forward in smooth, powerful strokes. Their skin, once rough and scaly, became sleek and supple, perfect for gliding through the warm seas that surrounded the continents. But it was their skulls that told the truest story of their power. The jaws of a mosasaur could open wide, hinged with a flexibility that allowed them to swallow large prey whole. Their teeth were sharp and curved backward, trapping anything that entered their mouths. Some species had double rows of teeth inside the jaw, ensuring that nothing could escape once caught. Their eyes, set forward and slightly upward, gave them the vision of an ambush hunter, always watching for movement above or beside them. Among them, two giants rose above all others. Mosasaurus, whose name means lizard of the Meuse River, was discovered in the cliffs of Europe and later found across the world. It was an enormous creature, stretching over 15 meters long, its jaws capable of crushing the skull of a smaller reptile or slicing through the bones of a giant fish. It was not a chaser, but a destroyer, a hunter that attacked with sudden bursts of speed, its tail sweeping in powerful arcs as it struck from below or behind. And then there was Tylosaurus, another ruler of the late Cretaceous seas, sleeker and faster than Mosasaurus. It hunted with intelligence and precision. The front of its skull ended in a long bony snout, perfect for stunning prey before delivering a killing bite. Fossilized stomach contents show the remains of fish, turtles, and even other marine reptiles. Nothing in its domain was beyond its reach. The oceans of the late Cretaceous were richer than ever before, filled with shoals of fish, swarms of ammonites, and early forms of seabirds that skimmed the waves. For the mosasaurs, this was a paradise, a world without limit. They spread quickly, filling every sea on Earth. Fossils have been found across Europe, North and South America, Africa, and even Antarctica. No ocean was too cold, no distance too great. Wherever the tides moved, they followed. One fossil discovery revealed something extraordinary: a mother mosasaur preserved with the remains of her unborn young still inside her body. It was the silent proof that these reptiles, like the ichthyosaurs before them, gave birth in the open sea. They no longer returned to land, not even to reproduce. The ocean was now their only home, from first breath to last. In life, they must have been both magnificent and terrifying. Imagine swimming above a coral reef, sunlight flickering through the water, when the shadow of something vast passes beneath you. A faint movement, a ripple of scales, and then the surface breaks as a creature longer than a bus glides upward in silence. Its head tilts slightly, eyes fixed on the world above. Then, with one beat of its tail, it disappears again into the blue. For millions of years, the mosasaurs ruled this world of light and depth. They became the apex predators of their age, the final rulers of the prehistoric seas before everything changed once more. Their story is one of evolution's boldest leaps, a tale of land dwellers who returned to the water and found perfection there. They began as hunters of rivers and coasts, but they ended as the architects of power in the open ocean, filling a role that whales and sharks would only later inherit. And though their bones now rest in stone, their legacy still moves with every wave, a reminder that even in Earth's greatest transitions, life always finds a way to begin again. To understand the reign of the mosasaurs, one must look beneath their skin into the quiet precision of their design. They were not built in haste nor shaped by chance. Every curve, every bone, every hidden motion beneath their scales told a story of purpose. The sea had spent millions of years teaching evolution how to build a hunter, and in the mosasaur, it created one of its finest works. At first glance, a mosasaur seemed almost familiar, a reptile stretched and streamlined for the ocean. Yet the closer one looked, the more it became something altogether different. Its head was long and narrow, but within that length hid a secret of remarkable engineering. The skull was not rigid, like that of most reptiles. Its bones were joined by flexible joints, allowing the entire structure to move and adjust as it fed. This was no mere jaw, it was a living trap, capable of widening far beyond what its appearance suggested. Inside that jaw, another adaptation waited, the double hinge, modern. Snakes still bear this same legacy, a clue to the kinship that ties them to these ancient reptiles. The lower jaw was divided into two halves, connected not by solid bone, but by elastic ligaments. When the mosasaur opened its mouth, the halves could spread apart, expanding its bite to swallow prey far larger than its head would seem to allow. It could seize a struggling fish, or even another reptile, and consume it whole, the body sliding down its throat in slow, muscular waves. Its teeth added another layer of perfection. Each one was long and conical, curving gently backward. This curve was not decoration, it was function. Once bitten, a victim could not pull free. Every movement dragged it deeper into the mosasaur's grip, the teeth catching like barbs. Fossilized jaws still hold the impressions of these teeth, worn smooth by endless years of use. They were not tools meant for chewing, but for holding, piercing, and swallowing. Further back in the throat, smaller teeth lined the inner jaws, an extra set for securing prey. This double row, once thought to belong only to snakes, revealed how evolution had repeated its own best ideas. The sea had no mercy, and neither did its creations. The mosasaur's head was not its only triumph. Its body, too, carried the marks of transformation. In its early ancestors, the tail had been long and straight, built for side-to-side swimming like a lizard's. But over time, this design changed. The bones near the end of the tail began to curve downward, forming a powerful fin. Muscles thickened along the spine, and the upper edge of the tail grew into a crescent shape. What had once been a reptilian tail became something new, a structure almost identical to the tail of a shark. This tail was the heart of its speed. With one sweep, it could send the entire body surging forward. It gave the mosasaur both endurance and acceleration, letting it close distances in the blink of an eye. Combined with its paddle-like flippers, the creature moved not like a crawling reptile, but like a living torpedo. It was grace disguised as power, precision hidden within muscle. Inside, the mosasaur carried another secret. Its bones were lighter than those of land reptiles, hollowed to reduce weight and aid buoyancy. Its chest was broad, enclosing lungs that could hold vast reserves of air. But more telling were the chemical traces left in its fossilized bones, signs that hinted at a higher metabolism. This discovery led scientists to an astonishing thought. The mosasaurs might not have been cold-blooded, as reptiles are today. They may have been warm-blooded, maintaining a steady body temperature that allowed them to stay active even in cooler waters. Their blood may have moved quickly, their hearts working with the energy of endurance. If true, this would explain their ability to dominate every corner of the ocean. Warmth brought stamina. Stamina brought victory. Their eyes, set deep and forward, revealed the mind of a focused predator. They could see well in the dim blue of the open sea, and perhaps even sense the faint movements of water made by distant prey. Their nostrils, small and placed high on the snout, allowed them to breathe without breaking the surface completely, a quiet motion that betrayed nothing to those below. Every part of their anatomy spoke the same language. They were hunters that relied on stealth, strength, and speed, not brute force alone. They did not need to chase endlessly. They simply needed to strike once, and strike perfectly. The evidence left behind, bite marks on ammonite shells, crushed fish bones, and even fossilized stomach contents, tells of their range and appetite. They ate fish, turtles, seabirds, and sometimes even other mosasaurs. The ocean was their empire, and every ripple within it was a potential meal. To imagine them alive is to picture motion without effort. The sunlight filters through the waves, scattering across their smooth, dark backs. A flick of the tail, a subtle shift of the flippers, and the giant vanishes into the depths. No sound follows, only the faint shimmer of bubbles rising where it passed. For millions of years, no creature matched their mastery. They were not the first to rule the ocean, but they were the last to do so with such brilliance before the age of reptiles came to an end. Every bone, every tooth, every curve of their bodies was a testament to the sea's power to refine. The mosasaurs were not born killers. They were sculpted into them, one quiet generation at a time, until the ocean itself looked back and saw its reflection in their form. There was a time when the heart of North America was not land at all, but ocean. It shimmered beneath the sun, calm on the surface yet alive with motion below. From the Gulf of Mexico to the edge of the Arctic, a warm, shallow sea split the continent in two. It was called the Western Interior Seaway, and for tens of millions of years, it was one of the most extraordinary bodies of water the planet had ever known. If you could stand on its ancient shore, the air would feel thick with warmth and salt. Gentle waves would lap against sandy beaches that once belonged to deserts and plains. The horizon would seem endless, a sheet of turquoise and gold stretching far beyond the eye. The sea was tropical, shallow enough in many places for sunlight to reach the bottom, yet deep enough in others to hide darkness and predators that moved unseen. This vast waterway was not born all at once. It began as a series of flooded valleys and coastal plains as the Cretaceous world warmed. The land shifted and sank, allowing the sea to spill inward from both north and south. Slowly, the two ends met, and the ocean bisected the continent. Where mountains once stood, coral reefs began to grow. Where forests had stretched, now there were swaying beds of seaweed and drifting clouds of plankton. The western interior, Seaway, became a world of layers, each one filled with its own life. Near the surface, where sunlight filtered through in shimmering ribbons, swarms of fish glided in schools that twisted and turned like single, living clouds. Among them darted sleek marine birds with long wings and sharp beaks, diving from above in flashes of silver to snatch prey from the water. Some, like Ichthyornis, were early cousins of modern seabirds, capable of flying over the waves and plunging beneath them with startling precision. Their cries would have echoed across the water, mingling with the sounds of the wind and surf. Beneath them moved creatures slower and older, giant turtles the size of small boats, their shells weathered and scarred from years of survival. They drifted through the shallows, feeding on jellyfish and soft-bodied prey, surfacing only to breathe before sinking again into the calm. Some had necks so long they could reach in wide circles without moving their bodies, the water rippling gently around them. Deeper still, where light faded and shadows thickened, the giants ruled. Here, the mosasaurs reigned supreme. They were the undisputed predators of this inland ocean, gliding through the dark waters with movements both silent and exact. Their jaws opened wide to swallow fish, turtles, and even other mosasaurs. Fossils found in what is now Kansas show bite marks that could only belong to their own kind, proof that these hunters turned on each other when the sea grew crowded. Their presence defined the ecosystem. Every creature that swam, whether small or immense, lived in constant awareness of their shape in the blue. Among their rivals swam enormous fish like Xiphactinus, a monster stretching over 5 meters long with sharp, interlocking teeth. It hunted other fish nearly its own size, sometimes swallowing them whole. In one fossil, a perfectly preserved Xiphactinus lies with another fish inside its stomach, the prey so large that it likely killed the predator in the act of swallowing it. The sea, even in its abundance, was merciless. The western interior Seaway was more than a hunting ground. It was a vast engine of life, fueled by the warmth of its waters and the nutrients that poured in from the rivers of two continents. Microscopic plankton bloomed in its sunlight, painting the surface green and gold. When they died, their remains sank to the floor, creating thick layers of black mud rich in carbon. Over millions of years, these layers would harden into rock, holding within them a record of every life that drifted through its depths. Yet this paradise was also dangerous. The very conditions that made it thrive also made it unstable. The seaway was shallow, and its oxygen levels often fluctuated. When currents slowed or temperatures rose, the lower waters became starved of air. Entire regions would turn deadly, the bottom growing dark and still as life suffocated. In these moments, the sea became a trap, a quiet, glittering surface concealing death below. The remains of creatures that perished in these suffocating depths now lie fossilized in stone, perfectly preserved, their bones unbroken, their stories sealed in silence. Volcanic ash occasionally rained from distant mountains, settling into the mud as pale layers between darker bands. Each eruption marked a moment of change, a reminder that the land and sea were always shifting, never at rest. Storms could rise with little warning, their winds pushing walls of water across the shallow coasts. Entire colonies of marine reptiles may have been swept inland and stranded when the waves withdrew, and yet, through these cycles of abundance and loss, life continued. The western interior seaway endured for nearly 60 million years, expanding and retreating as the continents rose and fell. It was a world of contrast, gentle in light, brutal in shadow, where beauty and danger shared the same space. Today, the bones of its inhabitants rest far from any ocean. The limestone cliffs of the American Midwest hold their ghosts, layer upon layer of shells, teeth, and bones pressed into stone. Once, this land was sea. Once, the heart of a continent pulsed with the rhythm of waves. And though the water is gone, the memory of its depths remains, whispered by the fossils that remember when North America was divided not by mountains or deserts, but by a sea filled with life and death, shimmering beneath an ancient sun. In the quiet depths of the ancient seas, power was never left uncontested. Every creature that ruled the water carried within it both hunger and caution, for the ocean gave freely, but it never gave safety. Even the strongest hunters had shadows, and sometimes those shadows looked exactly like themselves. Among the warm waters of the Cretaceous, the mosasaurs glided with supreme confidence. They were masters of the ocean, the culmination of millions of years of refinement. Their long, sleek bodies cut through the blue with ease, their tails flicking in deliberate rhythm. Nothing seemed capable of challenging them, yet nature does not allow perfection to rest. When one species dominates too completely, its greatest rival often becomes its own reflection. The evidence for this silent war lies not in stories, but in stone. Fossils of mosasaurs have been found across the world, their bones scarred with unmistakable marks, deep punctures, and gouges that match the shape and spacing of mosasaur teeth. Some bite wounds had begun to heal before death, showing that the victims had survived encounters with others of their kind. Others show no such mercy. The jaw marks are clean and fatal, locked in the fossil record as frozen moments of violence. These scars tell us that the ocean, even in its vastness, was crowded. The western interior Seaway, the great inland sea that split North America, was a paradise of life, but also a battleground of predators. The abundance of prey, fish, turtles, seabirds, and smaller reptiles drew countless hunters into the same waters. Over time, territories overlapped, and when two mosasaurs crossed paths in pursuit of the same prey, the balance of dominance broke. Imagine the scene. Two shadows drift in the dim blue, circling, their eyes fix on one another, unblinking. Perhaps one intruded into another's feeding ground, or perhaps they both followed the same scent trail through the water. The larger one tilts slightly, its tail twitching, in warning. The smaller one does not yield. The first strike comes not with hesitation, but with certainty. A lunge, a flash of white jaws, and the calm sea erupts into chaos. The creatures twist and roll, water boiling with motion. Their teeth clash, slicing through flesh and scale. Blood clouds the water in wide, red ribbons. For minutes, the two giants struggle, strength against strength, instinct against instinct, until one falls still, drifting downward into silence. The victor circles once, then disappears, leaving only the slow, spiraling descent of its rival's body. Such scenes were not rare. They were a part of life for the top predators of the Cretaceous. The bite marks found on fossilized mosasaur skulls and ribs speak of frequent, deliberate aggression. Some attacks targeted the head and neck, the killing zones. These were not accidents of feeding or scavenging, but calculated battles for territory, dominance, or even mating rights. The density of fossils within certain rock layers suggests that these creatures were far from solitary wanderers. In the richest marine deposits, their remains appear together, often alongside the bones of their prey. This clustering implies a high population density, so many apex predators sharing the same space that conflict was inevitable. The sea, though vast, had boundaries defined not by geography, but by need. To understand these confrontations is to glimpse the nature of the ocean itself. Even in abundance, there is tension. Life thrives where the balance of risk and reward never rests. The mosasaurs, though supreme, were bound by that same law. Their dominance did not free them from struggle. It deepened it. In some fossils, the bite marks are smaller, suggesting juveniles attacked by larger adults. This may have been cannibalism, an efficient, if brutal, survival strategy. The young, inexperienced, and wounded would have made easy meals in lean times. Other specimens show symmetrical scars, hinting at fights between evenly matched adults, where neither sought food but control. Perhaps they battled over breeding grounds or defended stretches of sea rich in fish and ammonites. In the still, sunlit shallows, dominance was survival. Such violence, though terrible, had purpose. It kept populations in check, ensuring that only the strongest, most capable individuals thrived. The fossil record bears quiet testimony to this balance. Even in their brutality, the mosasaurs were part of an order greater than themselves, a system of energy that flowed endlessly through predator and prey, death and rebirth. When we study these bones today, the story they tell is not one of cruelty, but of nature's ceaseless refinement. Every scar, every tooth mark, every healed wound is a record of adaptation, a reminder that evolution shapes life not through peace, but through pressure. And yet, there is a strange grace in this ancient violence. The mosasaurs were not creatures of chaos, but of design. Their power was measured, their movements efficient. Even when they turned upon one another, they did so with the precision of beings perfectly attuned to their world. In the stillness of the fossil beds, their battles have long ended. The waters that once churned with their conflict have vanished, replaced by stone and silence. But the bones remain, lying in quiet testimony to an ocean where strength ruled, and even kings had to fight to keep their crowns. If you listen closely, through the soft hum of time, you can almost hear it, the faint echo of motion through water, the rush of tails cutting the deep, the heartbeat of the sea itself, pulsing with the memory of predators who hunted not only the world around them, but their own reflections in the blue. The world of the Cretaceous was a place without clear edges. The line between ocean and land, air and water, was blurred by life that crossed them all. Where waves met sand and wind swept low across the shore, creatures from three realms converged. It was a time when the sea was alive with reptiles, the sky was ruled by wings of bone and skin, and the in-between was filled with shadows that could belong to either. Along the coasts of the western interior Seaway, the light was always changing. At dawn, the water caught the color of copper and glass. Gentle waves washed against limestone cliffs, where colonies of early seabirds nested in noisy gatherings. Their cries echoed over the water as they launched themselves into the wind, their feathers catching the sunlight, their shadows gliding across the ripples below. Beneath them, the surface was never still. Large marine reptiles, the Mosasaurs and the Plesiosaurs, moved just below, their dark shapes rising and sinking like drifting islands. The sea's hunters followed the seabirds' movements as easily as they followed the silver shimmer of fish. Above, wings beat. Below, tails swept. The space between was thin as breath. In these waters, the early seabirds were still new. Their ancestors had been land dwellers, but like the reptiles before them, they had found opportunity in the open ocean. Their bones were light, their beaks sharp, and their feathers coated in oil that kept them dry when they plunged into the water. Fossils found in ancient coastal stone, like those of Ichthyornis and Hesperornis, show a fascinating balance between bird and fish. Ichthyornis could fly like a gull, using its wings to soar above the waves, then dive sharply to catch fish near the surface. Its beak was lined with small, pointed teeth, a lingering reminder of its reptilian past. Hesperornis, on the other hand, had lost the ability to fly altogether. Its wings had shrunk into paddles, while its legs grew long and powerful, built for swimming. It lived much like a modern penguin, propelling itself through the water with strong kicks and surfacing for air before diving again into the dark. The air above them belonged to others. Pterosaurs, the ancient rulers of flight, still soared across the skies, their leathery wings stretching wider than those of any bird alive today. Some, like Pteranodon, glided effortlessly along the wind currents rising from the sea. With their long, toothless beaks and sleek heads crowned by thin crests, they looked like living kites. Fossils of Pteranodon have been found far from land, suggesting that these flying reptiles spent much of their lives over open water, diving to snatch fish or scavenging the remains of larger kills. They were not alone in their patrol. Smaller species, with shorter wings and sharper teeth, hunted the shallows, darting between cliffs and beaches in search of prey. Their cries mingled with the calls of the seabirds, creating a soundscape that must have echoed for kilometers, a chorus of wings, waves, and the distant splash of something large beneath the surface. At the edges of the sea, the land itself was alive. Crocodiles basked on sandbars and tidal flats, their eyes half-lidded, their bodies warmed by the sun. Occasionally, one would slip silently into the water, disappearing beneath the calm surface. Fossils show that some crocodiles of this time had already begun adapting to saltwater life. They could tolerate long stays at sea, using the same coasts and lagoons where seabirds and pterosaurs nested. These mixed ecosystems were fragile but dynamic. Every tide reshaped them. Fossil beds along the ancient Seaway capture this in layers of stone, fish bones intertwined with bird feathers, pterosaur remains buried beside shells and marine reptiles. It is as if time itself recorded the places where these worlds overlapped, the narrow boundaries where one form of life faded into another. What made this blending possible was the climate. The Cretaceous world was warm, the poles free of ice, and the air thick with moisture. Global sea levels were higher than at any point before or since. The coastline stretched for thousands of kilometers, forming lagoons, islands, and shallow bays. These transitional zones became havens for life that could cross boundaries, reptiles that could swim and walk, birds that could dive and fly, and creatures like the pterosaurs that could do both in their own way. Predators from every realm competed here. A pterosaur could swoop down for a fish, only to be surprised by a leap from a mosasaur lurking near the surface. A seabird might surface with prey in its beak, unaware of the shadow moving beneath it. Even on land, danger waited. Crocodiles lying motionless at the edge of the tide, watching for the chance to strike. But there was also cooperation in this chaos. Flocks of seabirds and pterosaurs often followed schools of fish disturbed by larger predators. When a mosasaur or a giant tuna drove prey toward the surface, the sky would erupt with wings. The sea and the air hunted together without knowing it, each feeding on the ripples made by the other. In the great balance of life, there was no true division between ocean, land, and sky, only movement. From above, a flying reptile could look down and see its reflection mirrored in the water's surface. Below, a swimming bird might look up and see wings crossing the sun. The two were linked by rhythm, by the cycle of breath and motion that tied all living things to the same current. When the western interior seaway finally vanished millions of years later, the echoes of this connection remained. Birds would inherit the air, crocodiles the coasts, and the descendants of those ocean reptiles would fade into memory. But for that long, shining age, the boundaries of the world dissolved, and the sky and sea hunted side by side, two mirrors of the same endless horizon. For every hunter that ruled the sea, there was always something beneath it learning to survive. Evolution never allowed dominance to rest for long. The ocean, vast and ancient, was not a kingdom built on power alone, but on balance, a quiet, endless game of invention and response. And in the age of marine giants, when mosasaurs and pliosaurs ruled the deep, their prey began to change. The story of the predators was one of speed, strength, and mastery, but the story of their prey was one of endurance and creativity. Every bite that struck from the dark, every shadow that fell from above, taught the hunted to adapt. Over time, this slow schooling of fear reshaped the seas. The ammonites, those spiraled wanderers that had long floated through the currents, began to alter their forms. Their shells, once smooth and elegant, started to grow armor. Ridges thickened, spines rose in curling crowns. Their shapes became strange, as though twisted by invisible hands. Some spirals stretched into weight, elongated coils. Others curved into tight knots, impossible to crush. Every new design was an answer, an act of quiet resistance against the jaws that pursued them. Fossils show how this transformation unfolded. Earlier ammonites from the Triassic and Jurassic ages were simple and symmetrical, their smooth shells perfect for floating through calm water. But by the late Cretaceous, their descendants had become almost unrecognizable. Some carried spikes along their edges. Others developed irregular shells that broke the clean pattern of their ancestors. They looked chaotic, but in that chaos was purpose. Each new twist made them harder to grab, harder to hold, harder to eat. The ammonites were not alone in their evolution. Across the reefs and open waters, fish too were changing. The smaller species that had once moved in, slow, drifting schools now became faster, leaner, and more agile. Their bodies narrowed into shapes that could dart and turn in an instant. Muscles grew denser, tails stronger. Those that survived learned to move not in straight lines, but in bursts of unpredictable motion, sudden flicks and spirals that confused even the most experienced hunter. Many of them began to swim together in vast shoals, their silver bodies flashing in unison. Safety, for them, came not from strength but from confusion. To a mosasaur, a shoal of fish was both feast and frustration, a blinding, shifting storm of light that scattered the moment it struck. In shallower waters, the armored ones evolved. Some fish developed scales thick enough to turn aside a bite. Others grew bony plates that locked together like puzzle pieces, forming shells over their heads and backs. These creatures were slower, but they had traded speed for defense. Predators learned to avoid them or waste precious energy breaking through their armor. Even the smaller shelled creatures, the clams, the snails, the crustaceans that crawled along the seabed, began to fight back in their own way. Their shells became heavier and more compact, their openings narrower, harder to pry apart. Many began to burrow, hiding just beneath the surface of the sand. Evolution had turned hiding into an art. The arms race between predator and prey became one of nature's most intricate dialogues. For every adaptation that made a hunter deadlier, the hunted replied with something new. A stronger jaw led to thicker armor. Sharper vision led to better camouflage. Faster pursuit led to swifter escape. Over millions of years, this quiet exchange sculpted the ocean into its modern form. The ammonites, perhaps, were the most expressive of all. Their shells became almost ornamental, spiraling into delicate shapes that seemed too fragile for survival. Yet these intricate designs were born from necessity. They may have also served another purpose, to confuse predators. The irregular ridges and fluted edges of their shells scattered light underwater, making their outlines harder to see. What began as defense became beauty, a language of adaptation written in geometry and grace. Some ammonites went even further, evolving buoyancy controls that allowed them to hover in perfect stillness, balancing in the currents like living balloons. Their soft bodies pulsed gently within their armor, drifting between light and shadow, waiting for danger to pass. In the stillness, there was wisdom, the knowledge that sometimes the best defense was not to fight, but to disappear. Other prey species took a different path, arming themselves with chemical defenses. Certain cephalopods, early ancestors of modern squids, began releasing dark clouds of ink to hide their escape. Others may have developed toxins in their skin or flesh, teaching their predators caution through bitter experience. Even the coral reefs, silent and unmoving, joined this long war. As grazers and scavengers pressed upon them, they grew sharper, harder, and more intricate, covering their surfaces with barbs and stinging cells. Life in the ocean had learned that stillness was no protection without strategy. Each adaptation, each quiet act of resistance, rippled outward through time. The predators grew faster, their senses sharper, their bodies more refined, but so did those they chased. The ocean became a web of strategy and counter-strategy, a living equation that no creature could ever fully solve. In the fossil record, this story lies side by side, teeth and armor, claws and shells, predator and prey forever entwined in stone. Each mark tells of a test, a battle, a solution found and lost again. The ammonite's spirals, the fish's scales, the shell's ridges, all are traces of evolution's patient conversation. And though most of these species are long gone, their lessons remain. Every creature that swims today carries some echo of that age-old struggle. The quick reflex, the protective shell, the instinct to hide, to fight, or to flee. In the end, it was not only the hunters that shaped the sea, but those who survived them. Their endurance wrote the rhythm of the ocean, turning fear into innovation and danger into design. The prey had fought back, and in doing so, they transformed the very nature of life beneath the waves. When we look at the bones of the sea's vanished rulers, it is impossible not to sense something familiar in their shapes. The ocean's great hunters, past and present, seem to echo one another, as though time itself remembers what works best in water. The line between eras blurs, and for a moment, you can almost imagine them together. The ancient reptilian titans gliding beside whales and sharks, the rhythm of motion the same, though their blood and bones belong to different worlds. Take the Mosasaurus, for example, the undisputed monarch of the late Cretaceous seas. It was a reptile that once ruled the very same waters where blue whales now pass. Its body stretched as long as a bus, with four powerful flippers and a tail shaped like a crescent blade. When it moved, it did not twist like a crocodile, but surged forward in long, sweeping strokes, just as sharks and dolphins do today. That movement, a side-to-side rhythm driven by the tail, was not coincidence. It was physics, the most efficient way for a body of such size to move through water. The ocean rewards certain designs. In the endless blue, shape decides survival. Long bodies with tapered ends glide smoothly, broad tails push with power, streamlined heads cut resistance like knives through silk. Evolution discovered these principles early, and it never forgot them. If the Mosasaurus was the perfect balance of speed and strength, the Liopleurodon of the Jurassic was the embodiment of power. Its skull alone measured more than 2 meters long, its jaws lined with conical teeth designed not to slice, but to crush. Unlike the faster mosasaurs that came after, the Liopleurodon used bursts of explosive force. It could accelerate quickly, strike with devastating precision, and disappear just as fast into the gloom. Its motion resembled that of a great white shark, swift, deliberate, and lethal. Scientists estimate that a Liopleurodon might have weighed nearly 50 tons, similar to some smaller modern whales. Its bite force has been compared to that of the largest predators alive today, rivaling even the orca. But while whales use teamwork and intelligence, the Liopleurodon relied purely on muscle and instinct. It was not an animal of emotion or strategy, but of mechanics, a body tuned for dominance by the slow patience of evolution. And before them both, during the Triassic and early Jurassic, there was Shonosaurus, the gentle giant among hunters. Unlike its successors, this ichthyosaur did not kill with power, but lived through grace. It could reach lengths of more than 20 meters, yet its body was slim and fluid, built for endurance rather than violence. Its snout was long and toothless, suggesting it fed on soft-bodied prey, perhaps schools of squid or fish that shimmered in the open sea. To imagine it is to picture something between a dolphin and a whale, its body moving in great arcs beneath the waves. Shonosaurus was an early lesson in how to master vast distances. The same principles that now allow whales to cross oceans were already written in its form, millions of years before the first mammal ever touched the shore. When we place these ancient titans beside their modern counterparts, the similarities become almost poetic. The blue whale, the orca, the great white shark, each carries an echo of those that came before. They are not descendants of the mosasaurs or the pliosaurs, but they share the same conversation with water. The sea shapes everything that moves within it. The laws of physics and biology are eternal partners in this shaping. Water resists motion, but it also gives lift and grace to those who learn its rhythm. To move efficiently, evolution molds bodies toward a single idea: streamline the mass, widen the tail, flatten the flippers, and let the flow do the rest. Over millions of years, these solutions reappear, first in reptiles, then in mammals, then again in fish. Each time, the ocean erases the difference between them, sculpting predators that look alike not because they are kin, but because they obey the same laws of motion. Speed in the sea is not simply about movement, it is about energy. Every pulse of a tail or flick of a fin pushes against the dense weight of water. The faster the swimmer, the greater the cost. A great white shark can reach bursts of 60 kilometers per hour, but must rest between hunts. An orca, slightly slower, trades raw speed for endurance and control. The Mosasaurus and Liopleurodon likely followed the same balance, bursts of violence followed by slow, drifting stillness. Even Shonosaurus, though peaceful, mastered this balance in its own way. Its long body and narrow fins made it one of the most energy-efficient swimmers in history. It moved like a thought, quiet, measured, endless, and so the ocean keeps repeating its favorite ideas. The forms change, but the function endures. The whale's tail recalls the mosasaur's fin. The shark's glide mirrors the pliosaur's pursuit. The dolphin's leap across sunlight is an echo of something that once lived in a world before mammals, before birds, before even flowers bloomed on land. Perhaps this is what makes the sea feel timeless. It remembers shapes better than it remembers species. It holds on to motion, the elegant sweep of a tail, the spiral of pursuit, the slow rhythm of breath between dives. When a blue whale rises to the surface and exhales a plume of mist, the sound carries across the water like memory. Somewhere in that sound, faint but real, is the ghost of the Mosasaurus, the Liopleurodon, and the Shonosaurus, giants whose bodies taught the ocean what it means to move and whose lessons still ripple quietly through every wave. Every fossil, no matter how still or silent, holds a pulse of life within it. Beneath the layers of stone, under the weight of millions of years, the bones of the ocean's ancient rulers whisper their secrets. They do not speak in words, but in traces, in tiny chemical patterns, the textures of skin, and the faint outlines of what was once alive. To study them is to learn a language written in time itself, one that modern science is only just beginning to read fluently. When early paleontologists first uncovered the skeletons of marine reptiles, they could see only shape. They traced the curves of ribs, the teeth, the tails, the delicate joints of fins. The bones gave form to imagination, but little else. Now, with new eyes and finer tools, scientists have learned to see far deeper into what those bones were made of, how those creatures lived, and even what colors shimmered across their skin when sunlight filtered through the ancient seas. In laboratories lit by the soft hum of machines, small fragments of fossil bone are sliced thinner than paper. Through microscopes, they reveal networks of channels where blood once flowed. Within these patterns, scientists can measure the ratios of oxygen and carbon isotopes, invisible markers that record temperature, diet, and even migration. Each element carries a memory. The oxygen trapped in the bone of an ichthyosaur, for example, tells of the warmth or chill of the ocean it swam through. Variations along its skeleton hint at the distances it traveled in search of food or breeding grounds. Through such traces, researchers have learned that many marine reptiles were not cold and sluggish, as once imagined, but warm-blooded travelers. They could regulate their body heat, maintaining the energy to chase prey across entire oceans. Some may have even gathered in seasonal migrations, returning year after year to the same shallow waters to give birth. Fossils have revealed much about that birth itself. In one extraordinary process, discovery, a mother ichthyosaur was found with her young still inside her, one halfway emerged from her body. The bones froze her in a moment between life and death, proof that these reptiles gave live birth at sea, never needing to return to land. Other fossils show clusters of tiny bones around larger skeletons, suggesting family groups that stayed together for protection or perhaps for teaching. What they ate has also been uncovered, not through guesswork, but through direct evidence. In some fossil bellies, scientists have found the remains of fish scales, ammonite shells, and even bones of smaller reptiles. These fossilized stomach contents show what no artistic reconstruction ever could: the last meals of animals that have been gone for more than 60 million years. In others, scientists have found smooth, rounded stones inside the rib cages of plesiosaurs. These are called gastroliths, and they once helped the creatures control their buoyancy or grind food in their stomachs, just as some birds and reptiles do today. Even skin, once thought impossible to preserve, has survived the long erosion of time. In certain fossils, thin impressions show the texture of scales or the outline of soft tissue. Under powerful scanning instruments, these impressions reveal microscopic pigment cells known as melanosomes, tiny structures that can reflect color. By comparing their shapes to those of modern animals, scientists have begun to estimate the hues these creatures might have worn. Some ichthyosaurs likely shimmered in deep blues and silvers, blending with the light of the sea. Others may have been dark above and pale below, a pattern called countershading that helps hunters remain hidden in open water. Modern imaging has pushed these discoveries further, using X-ray scans, lasers, and synchrotron beams, machines that accelerate light itself. Paleontologists can see details invisible to the naked eye. Within the stone, they can detect traces of soft tissue, remnants of organ structures, and even the fine lines of muscle attachment. These scans reveal how fins flexed, how tails moved, and how the great jaws of predators closed with precision. In some fossils, scientists have discovered networks of tiny canals within the teeth, suggesting sensitivity to pressure. Such details hint that the great marine reptiles could sense vibrations in water, much like crocodiles and modern whales. The seas of the Mesozoic were full of motion, and these creatures were built to read it. Every discovery reshapes the past. The creatures once seen as cold, unfeeling monsters are now understood as complex and adaptive beings, warm-blooded, agile, and perhaps even social. A fossil of a young plesiosaur found beside an adult of the same species may suggest parental care, the slow rhythm of protection and learning that connects all life, even across eras. The work continues quietly. In labs across the world, fossils are bathed in fine light, their surfaces mapped molecule by molecule. Each year, new patterns emerge. A color here, a trace of collagen there, a shift in chemistry that rewrites an old assumption. Science moves with patience, like the sea that once covered these bones. And yet, for all the machines and mathematics, there is something deeply human in this search. Each fossil invites not only study, but wonder. When a paleontologist holds a fragment of mosasaur skin or a tooth still sharp after 70 million years, they hold more than evidence. They hold continuity. The ocean that carried these giants still moves, its salt still the same, its rhythms unchanged. The science of fossils is the science of memory. Every layer of stone is a chapter written in pressure and time. Every discovery draws the living world closer to the vanished one. Through isotope and pigment, through bone and trace, the ancient seas rise again, not in waves of water, but in waves of understanding. And within that quiet work, the monsters of the deep breathe once more, their stories unfolding in the light of a microscope, one grain of dust at a time. For millions of years, the oceans had been a cradle of abundance. They shimmered with life in every depth, from drifting plankton to the great reptiles that ruled the blue. But even the calmest waters can hide change beneath their surface. In the final chapters of the Cretaceous, something began to shift. Slowly at first, like a whisper in the currents, the balance that had nurtured the giants began to unravel. The late Cretaceous world was warm, perhaps warmer than at any other time in Earth's history. The poles were ice-free, and the seas reached deep into the continents. Tropical waters lapped at what are now the plains of North America, and coral reefs stretched across ancient coastlines. Yet warmth, though it feels like life, can also be a warning. Beneath the sunlight, invisible patterns in the chemistry of the ocean began to falter. Volcanoes, vast and persistent, erupted across what is now India, releasing plumes of gas into the sky. These eruptions, known today as the Deccan traps, poured carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at unimaginable rates. With every year, the air thickened with greenhouse gases, and the oceans absorbed much of that burden. What had once been a steady exchange between sea and sky became an overload. The water grew more acidic, quietly dissolving the shells of the smallest creatures that floated near the surface. Those tiny organisms, plankton with delicate shells of calcium, were the base of everything. They fed the small fish, which fed the larger ones, which fed the predators that ruled the deep. As the chemistry of the water changed, their shells weakened. Some could no longer form at all. The great food web that had endured for millions of years began to thin from its foundation upward. Meanwhile, oxygen in the ocean began to fade. Warm water holds less oxygen than cold, and as global temperatures rose, the deep currents that once mixed and refreshed the seas began to slow. In many regions, the water turned sluggish, heavy, and still. Layers of the ocean stopped breathing. Life that had thrived in those depths found itself trapped in invisible suffocation. Fossils from this time tell a quiet, grim story. Sediments that were once rich with signs of life become suddenly dark and empty. The layers show an increase in black shale, a type of rock that forms when the seafloor is choked of oxygen and only bacteria remain. The marks of thriving ecosystems vanish, replaced by the silence of decay. For the great marine reptiles, the change must have been felt in every dive. The once clear waters, filled with flashing schools of fish, became clouded with decay. The abundance that had sustained them began to disappear. The ammonites, once the beating heart of the oceanic food chain, dwindled. The smaller prey species either fled to surviving regions or died out entirely. With fewer meals to find, the hunters grew thin. Some species disappeared long before the final catastrophe arrived. The mosasaurs, masters of the late Cretaceous seas, faced an ocean that no longer welcomed them. Their strength had always been tied to the richness of the food web, to the dance of abundance between plankton, fish, and predator. But even the most perfect design cannot endure in an environment that is dying from within. As oxygen declined, some regions of the ocean became death traps, wide stretches of water where no large creature could survive for long. On land, too, signs of instability began to show. Plants struggled under erratic climates. Rain patterns shifted. Storms grew more violent as the air thickened with heat. Rivers carried more sediment into the oceans, darkening the shallows and smothering coral reefs. The clear tropical waters that once shone with light began to lose their brilliance. To the creatures that lived through it, these changes would not have been sudden. Generations passed before the full weight of the shift was felt. A single lifetime might have seen only small differences: fewer fish in the shallows, warmer currents, quieter reefs. But over time, the pattern deepened. The great seas that had nurtured the monsters of the Cretaceous slowly began to betray them. Scientists studying these ancient layers have found chemical fingerprints that trace this collapse. The carbon balance of the oceans shifted, nitrogen levels dropped, the once steady rhythm of ocean circulation faltered. It was as if the planet's lungs had begun to close. And through it all, life tried to adapt. Some species of plankton changed their chemistry to survive in acidifying water. Some fish evolved to tolerate lower oxygen levels. But such adaptations take time, and the pace of change was relentless. The predators at the top, the mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and giant turtles, had no such luxury. Their fate was tied to the stability of everything below them. Without prey, without balance, the ocean that had once carried them in weightless power became a place of scarcity and quiet hunger. In the end, the sea itself had turned. Its once clear rhythm of creation and renewal had faltered. It was no longer a cradle, but a mirror of instability, a reflection of a world approaching its breaking point. And so, before the asteroid fell, before the fire and ash that would close the age of giants forever, the first act of the ending had already begun. The oceans, once full of life's song, had grown quiet. The kings of the water swam on, unaware that the very world beneath them was already slipping away. It began with silence. A morning like any other in the late Cretaceous world, the seas glimmered beneath a soft sun, calm and endless. Waves rolled across the shallow coasts. The reefs were alive with color, and in the deep blue beyond, the giants still moved with effortless grace. Mosasaurs hunted along the continental shelves. Plesiosaurs drifted through the open waters. Schools of fish shimmered beneath them like living clouds. Nothing in the rhythm of that day suggested it would be the last. Far above the earth, a small fragment of rock, no larger than a mountain, was already falling. It had traveled through the black for millions of years, silent and unseen, until it met the thin blue line of the planet's sky. When it struck with the brightness of a second sun. The impact came in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. For an instant, the world ignited. The asteroid tore through the atmosphere and hit the shallow sea with a force so immense that it vaporized both rock and water. Temperatures at the point of contact rose higher than the surface of the sun. The ocean did not ripple, it vanished, turned to steam and fire in a single breath. A wall of water rose from the wound. It climbed higher than any wave before or since, hundreds of meters tall, curling outward in every direction. Within moments, that wave became a moving mountain, rushing across the coastlines of an entire planet. It raced faster than sound, sweeping forests, plains, and deltas into its grasp. Far from the impact site, in the ancient western interior Seaway, the mosasaurs would have felt the first tremors. The water around them vibrated as the shock wave rippled through the ocean's body. Moments later, the ground beneath the sea began to convulse. Currents turned violent, swirling into vast spirals. The calm depths, where light had always moved in slow blue rhythms, became a storm of silt and chaos. Then came the wave. It struck with no warning, crashing through ancient coastlines and tearing apart the reefs that had stood for millions of years. Creatures that had ruled the water for ages were hurled against the sea floor or dragged into the air, their bodies thrown across the tide. Ammonites, the once countless spirals of the ocean, shattered in their shells. Fish were flung onto the land in glittering heaps, and the air filled with steam and ash. For hours, the sea rose and fell in endless fury. Waves collided, rebounded, and circled the world. Each one carried the memory of that single instant of impact. When they finally began to calm, the world that remained was unrecognizable, but the wave was only the beginning. From the crater, a column of vaporized rock and molten dust erupted upward, piercing the sky. It carried with it sulfur, carbon, and metal, spreading outward until it wrapped the planet in a shroud of darkness. For days, the sky glowed red. Then, the light began to fade. The oceans cooled. The surface, once warm and bright, turned dim. Sunlight could no longer pierce the upper layers. The plankton, those fragile drifters that formed the base of all ocean life, began to die. Without them, the food web unraveled. The fish that fed on them starved. The predators that fed on the fish followed soon after. As ash and soot fell back to earth, the seas turned black. Rain carried acid into the water, eating away at shells and coral. The surface became a chemical storm, boiling in some places, freezing in others. The warmth of the Cretaceous vanished almost overnight. For the marine reptiles, the end came slowly, not in one moment but in many. The mosasaurs, trapped in a world with no prey, began to vanish. The plesiosaurs that once glided beneath the waves sank quietly into extinction. Even the survivors, sharks, small fish, turtles, struggled to find balance in a world where the sun no longer shone. Fossil layers from this time tell the story in their stillness. The once diverse sediments of the ocean floor turn abruptly, pale, marked by a thin line of clay rich in iridium, a rare metal from the asteroid itself. Above that line, the fossils of marine reptiles disappear. The great age of the sea's monsters ended not with a roar, but with absence. And yet, amid the devastation, the earth did not stop. Beneath the darkened sky, the waves still moved, their rhythm slower now, but steady. Microscopic life began to return first, clinging to what little light remained. In time, that faint green shimmer would rebuild the ocean's web. But for a while, the sea was hollow, an echo of what it had been. If you could have floated there, in the stillness after the storms, you would have seen a world suspended between life and silence, the sun hidden, the air cold, the surface of the ocean smooth as glass. No call of seabirds, no glint of scales beneath the waves, only the slow movement of water, whispering over the bones of giants that would never rise again. It was not simply the death of creatures, but the closing of an era. The end of a time when the ocean itself had been the stage for the greatest forms life had ever taken. In that quiet, the sea began to forget them, folding their memory into stone, waiting for another age to come and rediscover what had once been lost. When the roar of impact faded and the last of the tsunamis fell still, the world sank into quiet. What had been a planet of motion and sound, the thrash of waves, the songs of living things, became a hushed and altered place. The oceans, once the shimmering lungs of earth, now moved with the slow, heavy rhythm of decay. The surface of the water was darker than before. Ash drifted down like snow, covering everything it touched. It settled on the waves, on the sand, on the bones of the creatures that had ruled the sea. The ocean breathed in that ash, and with each breath, it changed. Carbon and sulfur from the impact mixed with the water, forming weak acids that spread through every current. The pH of the ocean, the fine balance that all life depended on, began to fall. At first, the damage was invisible. The surface still shimmered faintly when light broke through the clouds. But beneath, the smallest lives, the plankton, the algae, the drifting architects of the sea, began to vanish. Their shells, once built from delicate calcium, began to dissolve in the new acidity. The base of the ocean's food web, the quiet builders of abundance, disappeared in a matter of months. Without them, everything began to follow. The fish that had survived the chaos found the water barren, with nothing left to eat. They starved. The predators that had hunted them, the sharks, the smaller reptiles, the last of the ammonites, faded soon after. The ocean, which had been a cathedral of life, became a grave. In the shallow seas where coral reefs had once flourished, decomposition took hold. Every fallen creature became a source of release. Bacteria swarmed over the remains, consuming and converting, but their feast came at a cost. The process pulled oxygen from the water, leaving behind suffocating layers where nothing larger could breathe. Those zones of death spread outward, joining one another like ink in water until whole regions of the sea turned toxic. The color of the ocean changed. Once blue and translucent, it darkened to shades of green and brown. The sunlight, already dimmed by the dust that hung in the sky, could no longer reach the depths. The sea's upper layers grew warm by day, yet the deep remained cold and stagnant. Circulation failed. The great conveyor belts of water that had once mixed nutrients and oxygen across the planet fell silent. On land, the world was frozen under a veil of ash. The forests had burned. The air grew cold. The rain was sour. What rivers carried to the sea was not life, but the residue of ruin, minerals, soot, and fragments of a world undone. Each drop of that rain added to the ocean's burden. It is difficult to imagine such stillness. For millions of years, the ocean had been the engine of renewal, cycling matter through life and death with effortless balance. Now, that cycle had broken. The seafloor was blanketed with a thick layer of fine sediment, rich in carbon, poor in breath. Whole ecosystems, from the surface to the deep trenches, collapsed within years. The silence that followed was not the peace of rest, but the quiet of absence. In the fossil record, this silence can still be read. There is a thin band of clay that separates the Cretaceous from the Paleogene, a boundary as fine as a sheet of paper, yet carrying the weight of extinction. Below it lie the remains of a vibrant ocean filled with spiraled shells and fossilized bones. Above it, almost nothing. The transition is abrupt, like a breath held too long. For hundreds of thousands of years, the oceans remained subdued. The chemistry of the water slowly began to reset, but life did not rush to return. The Earth had to rebuild its foundation molecule by molecule. The smallest organisms were the first to come back, tiny plankton drifting once more in the warming currents. They formed new shells, weaker at first, but enough to begin again. From their fragile rebirth, new food webs would one day grow. Yet, during those first long, centuries after the impact, the seas were nearly empty. The vast stretches of the western interior, Seaway, once a living corridor through a continent, fell into silence and silt. The ammonites were gone. The Plesiosaurs, the Mosasaurs, the great fishes of the Cretaceous, all gone. Only the shadows of their shapes remained, pressed into stone. The ocean did not forget them, but it closed over their memory with patience. Storms continued to roll across its surface. The tides still rose and fell, but for a time, those movements belonged only to the elements. The pulse of biology was faint, like a heartbeat under deep sleep. In that silence, the planet rested. It was not the end of life, only its pause, a deep inhalation before the next breath of evolution. The Earth had always endured change, though rarely with such grief, and when the first glimmers of light returned, filtering through a thinning sky, the water began to awaken. Small shapes drifted once more through the upper layers. New species of plankton began to bloom, spreading color back into the sea. The silence began to soften, replaced by the faint hum of renewal. But in those early days of the Paleogene, before the coral reefs rose again and the mammals ventured into the waves, the ocean was a hollow cathedral, vast and waiting. Every current that moved through it carried the memory of what had been lost, and the quiet promise of what would someday rise again. In the deep quiet that followed the fall of the giants, the ocean seemed empty. The great hunters were gone. The ammonites that once spiraled through the blue were gone. The waters that had once churned with power and motion were still, carrying only the faint pulse of life that had managed to endure. Yet, in that emptiness, something ancient and small continued to move. Tiny fins flickered through the gloom, shadows glided beneath the surface. Even as the sea fell silent, not all had vanished. The survivors of that dark age were not the largest, nor the most powerful. They were the adaptable, the flexible, the ones that could bend where others had broken. Sharks, rays, small fish, and a scattering of resilient invertebrates lived on. They were the quiet architects of the ocean's recovery, carrying within them the memory of what had been and the blueprint of what was yet to come. Sharks had already seen extinction before. They were far older than the mosasaurs, older even than the dinosaurs. Their history stretched back hundreds of millions of years through 5 mass extinctions. They had survived changing oceans, dying reefs, and entire shifts in the chemistry of the planet. What kept them alive was not dominance, but patience. Sharks were never creatures of abundance. They reproduced slowly, moved efficiently, and wasted little. They could go days without feeding, conserving energy when food was scarce. Their skeletons, made of flexible cartilage instead of heavy bone, allowed them to glide effortlessly, spending little effort in a world suddenly stripped of prey. In the new oceans of the Paleogene, sharks shrank. The giant forms of the Cretaceous faded, replaced by smaller, lighter species. Those that survived tended to be generalists, hunters that could eat whatever the water offered. Some hunted in the shallows, feeding on crustaceans and small fish. Others scavenged the drifting remains of creatures that had perished in the collapse. Each carried a design refined by crisis, not strength, but endurance. The rays, close kin to the sharks, survived in a similar way. Their bodies, flat and wide, allowed them to hide along the seafloor, half buried in sand. When predators and prey alike disappeared, the rays found safety in stillness. They fed on the bottom, digging for worms, shellfish, and detritus, all things that remained even in the poorest seas. In a time when the surface world was scarred and silent, the ocean floor became a refuge. Small fish, too, were quick to adapt. The larger species that had dominated the Cretaceous food webs perished first. Their hunger demanded too much, but smaller fish, with faster reproductive cycles and shorter lives, filled the empty spaces left behind. Their young matured quickly, ensuring that even when whole schools vanished, new generations would rise within weeks. These fish learned to occupy new ecological roles, spreading across coastal shallows and deeper waters alike. Their swarming, schools brought motion back to the sea. It was not strength that had saved them. It was scale, simplicity, and adaptability. Large creatures depend on stability, steady food, steady climate, steady space. Small ones can live through chaos. They require less, and in taking less, they endure more. The early Paleogene seas were a patchwork of survivors. Sharks glided through the shadows, smaller and leaner. Rays moved like drifting leaves across the seabed. Fish shimmered in the dim light, their scales catching what little brightness filtered through the recovering sky. It was a quieter world, slower and gentler, but alive. Over time, the chemistry of the ocean began to heal. The acidity faded, the circulation of currents returned. Nutrients once trapped on the seafloor began to rise again, carried upward by the restless movement of tides. In these reawakening waters, plankton returned, the first true sign that life was rebuilding. The survivors fed, multiplied, and spread. With them came new opportunities. Small sharks evolved into new forms, some becoming faster and more agile, others more specialized for the niches of the recovering world. The ancestors of modern reef fish began to appear, their colors still pale, their shapes still simple, but their variety hinting at the explosion of diversity that would come later. Rays began to glide across shallow lagoons, and their descendants would one day fill coral reefs with graceful motion. What emerged from this time was not merely survival, but transformation. The ocean that had once belonged to the reptiles now belonged to smaller, swifter lives. It was an ocean of balance rather than domination, of cycles instead of empires. Every surviving lineage, sharks, rays, fish, mollusks, carried traits that made them both fragile and enduring. Together, they wrote the new pattern of marine life, one that would define the next 60 million years. Modern oceans still carry that inheritance: the shape of a shark, the rhythm of a ray's movement, the flickering school of fish beneath the waves, all are echoes of those survivors. Their ancestors swam through waters poisoned by ash, hunted in worlds stripped of light, and endured through stillness when everything else collapsed. From their resilience came renewal. The survivors did not rebuild the ocean as it had been. They built it anew, with different rules and gentler proportions. What they created would become the blueprint for every sea that followed, one where adaptability mattered more than size, where balance mattered more than power, and where even in the face of extinction, life found its way back into the light. And so, in the hush of the recovering Paleogene ocean, the world began again. Small fins traced new paths through the shallows. Tiny scales shimmered beneath the surface. The survivors, quiet and uncelebrated, swam on, carrying with them the memory of all that had been lost and the promise of everything still to come. For a long while after the silence, the ocean belonged to small lives. The sharks and rays endured. The reefs began to rebuild. Tiny fish darted through the shallows, and plankton once again shimmered in the light. The sea was healing, slowly, patiently. Yet, the age of giants was not gone forever. In time, the ocean would call another kind of creature to fill its open blue. Not reptiles this time, but mammals. Tens of millions of years passed. On land, the world transformed. Forests spread again across the continents, and strange new animals walked beneath their canopies. Among them were small, hoofed mammals that spent their days near rivers and lagoons. They waded through the shallows, searching for plants and small prey. Their limbs were still built for walking, their nostrils pointed forward, but their hearts seemed to linger on the water. Some of these creatures, through countless generations, ventured deeper. They found safety there, food there, freedom there. Over time, the line between land and sea began to blur for them. The shore, once their home, became a memory. Their legs grew shorter, their bodies became heavier, denser, their nostrils crept upward along their heads. The rhythm of their lives shifted from the heartbeat of the forest to the pulse of the tides. These were the ancestors of whales. At first, they were small and uncertain, creatures of two worlds. One of the earliest, called Plesiosaurs, still looked much like a land animal, slender, long-legged, its ears beginning to change to hear underwater sound. Fossils found in what was once an ancient river valley show that it likely hunted in shallow streams, its head dipping below the surface to snatch at fish. But evolution, as always, was patient and persistent. The descendants of Plesiosaurs began to drift farther from the land. Their feet widened into paddles. Their tails grew stronger, more flexible. They became fully aquatic, carried by the same waters that had once belonged to the Mosasaurs and Ichthyosaurs. The ocean, it seems, remembered what worked. Across tens of millions of years, evolution rediscovered familiar shapes. The first true whales, like Basilosaurus, stretched nearly 20 meters in length, long, sleek, and powerful. They were reptiles in no sense, but their forms echoed those ancient designs. Streamlined bodies for gliding, fins in place of limbs, fluked tails for thrust. The physics of water had dictated the same solution again, sculpting mammals into the same hydrodynamic perfection that had once belonged to the reptiles of the Mesozoic. Convergent evolution, scientists call it, when unrelated creatures, shaped by the same environment, find the same answers. It is as if the sea itself had whispered its secret. To live here, you must move like this. The whales became faster, more specialized. Some hunted with speed and strength, their teeth sharp and conical like those of the mosasaurs before them. Others learned a gentler art, filtering tiny prey from of the water with baleen plates. They grew immense, larger than any creature that had ever lived. The blue whale, their descendant, would one day eclipse even the largest Shonosaurus. Its heart alone would outweigh a small car. Its voice would travel across oceans. But though the scale had grown, the principle was the same. The ocean had once again given rise to giants that breathed air yet ruled the deep. The mammals that had fled extinction on land had now become masters of the water. Their senses changed to match their new world. Sound became their language. Light fades quickly in the sea, but sound travels far, bouncing off currents and cliffs. Whales learned to sing, long, low songs that carried through hundreds of kilometers, connecting one life to another across the vast and empty blue. In those songs, perhaps, there was something older than memory, a rhythm that echoed the pulse of the ichthyosaurs that once glided the same paths, the ancient cadence of the sea itself. Their intelligence deepened too. Unlike the cold, calculating hunters of the Cretaceous, whales moved in family groups, caring for their young, teaching them the ways of the ocean. Mothers guided calves through migratory routes that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Some species traveled from warm birthing grounds to cold feeding waters and back again, tracing invisible maps across the planet. The ocean had created not only new giants, but new minds. In them, evolution had written a kind of poetry, the return of air-breathing creatures to the sea, the reinvention of the same design that had triumphed before. Where once there had been reptilian strength, now there was mammalian grace. The giants of old had relied on muscle and instinct. These new ones swam with communication, cooperation, and memory. When we watch them today, the arch of a whale's back breaking through the surface, the spray of its breath catching the sunlight, we are watching the continuation of a pattern older than history. The sea's giants have changed their faces, but not their form. The same curve of spine, the same balance of power and stillness, the same surrender to the laws of water. The ichthyosaurs, the mosasaurs, the plesiosaurs, all gone, yet not forgotten. Their legacy did not end with extinction. It drifted quietly through the ages, waiting for another kind of creature to take it up. When the whales arrived, they did not invent something new. They remembered something ancient, and so the giants returned, not as conquerors, but as inheritors. Their shapes, their motion, their quiet dominion over the sea, all spoke to a truth written deep in Earth's history. Life always finds its way back to balance. The ocean always finds its way back to giants. Deep beneath the ground, in layers of stone pressed and folded by time, the ocean still breathes. Its voice is faint, carried not by sound but by the quiet persistence of fossils, the bones, the impressions, the ghostly outlines of lives that ended millions of years ago. These remains are not silent. They whisper to the patient listener, to the hands that brush away the dust with a brush as soft as memory, revealing traces of a vanished sea. In the deserts of Morocco, where the sand glows red beneath the sun, paleontologists kneel among limestone beds that were once part of a warm, shallow ocean. Every stroke of their tools releases fragments of that ancient world. Teeth gleam like glass among the stones, belonging to creatures that ruled the water long before whales took their first breath. There are mosasaurs here, their jaws still lined with curved teeth, their skeletons locked in positions that suggest motion, as if frozen mid-hunt. Yet, it is not the bones alone that speak. In some fossils, the outline of skin remains, pressed like a shadow into the rock. When scientists study these impressions under light, they can see the patterns of scales, tiny, overlapping, and precise. These textures show that mosasaurs did not have the rough armor of crocodiles, as once thought, but smoother, more flexible skin. It shimmered, sleek, and hydrodynamic, shaped for speed. In one remarkable specimen, traces of pigments remain. Chemical analyses reveal the presence of melanin, the same pigment found in modern animals. From this, scientists believe that some mosasaurs were dark on top and lighter beneath, a pattern called countershading. It would have made them nearly invisible in the open water, a natural camouflage perfected by countless generations. In the chalk cliffs of Kansas, the whispers continue. During the Cretaceous, this land was part of the western interior Seaway, an ocean that once divided North America. Today, it is dry prairie, but the limestone holds the remains of that vanished sea. Here, fossils of fish, turtles, birds, and marine reptiles rest together, preserved in a kind of stillness that feels almost sacred. Some skeletons are nearly complete, their bones arranged just as they were in life, their final moments captured by the quiet sediment that settled over them. Among these layers, scientists have found more than just skeletons. They have uncovered the remains of stomach contents, the last meals of ancient predators. Within the rib cages of mosasaurs lie the bones of smaller fish and fragments of other marine reptiles. Some fossils even show signs of regurgitation, evidence that these hunters could consume prey too large for their stomachs and later expel what they could not digest. In one fossil, the remains of an ammonite shell were found crushed between the teeth of a reptile, confirming what had long been guessed, that the hard armor of their prey was no protection against such power. Every discovery adds color and motion, back to what once seemed static. Far to the north, in the soft shale of Germany, another kind of fossil tells its story. Here, in deposits that were once the floor of a calm lagoon, the skeletons of ichthyosaurs have been found in extraordinary condition. Some preserve not only bone but outlines of flesh, flippers, and even internal organs. One specimen, known as Stenopterygius, revealed the clear silhouette of its body and the remains of a small embryo inside, proof that these creatures gave birth to live young, just as modern whales do. Under microscopes, scientists can see patterns in the preserved skin, showing that ichthyosaurs, too, had countershading. The pigment cells, still arranged in ancient symmetry, tell of creatures that shimmered with gradients of blue and silver as they swam through prehistoric light. In the last few decades, technology has given these fossils new ways to speak. Scanning electron microscopes can read the shape of individual pigment cells, allowing scientists to reconstruct colors long thought lost. X-ray imaging reveals the traces of muscles and organs hidden within stone. Chemical tests can detect the signatures of ancient proteins, remnants of life that survived the press of millions of years. With each new tool, the line between what is known and what is imagined becomes thinner, more intricate. Soft tissue preservation, once thought impossible, has rewritten everything we believed about these marine reptiles. The old image of scaly, lumbering monsters has given way to something far more elegant. Creatures with smooth, dark skin, warm bodies, and eyes that could see through dim light. Some might even have had traces of color, subtle variations that reflected the depths they lived in. It is humbling to realize that stone can remember such things, that a fossil can hold not just the structure of bone, but the whisper of skin, the trace of a heartbeat, the outline of a child carried inside its mother. And so, the work continues in the deserts of Morocco, the cliffs of Kansas, the quarries of Germany, and across countless other places where the ocean once lay. Each fossil is a page in a story that has no ending, only pauses. Each discovery brings the past closer, turning silence into song. When scientists lift a slab of rock and uncover the faint shimmer of an ancient scale, they are not simply uncovering death. They are uncovering endurance, the quiet persistence of life's memory carried through the ages by stone and patience. The ocean that once belonged to the reptiles is gone, but its memory remains etched in color and form. Every fossil is a whisper from that lost world, reminding us that nothing in nature is ever truly gone. It only changes shape, waiting for hands and eyes gentle enough to listen. Across the long arc of time, the ocean has been both a cradle and a judge. It has given rise to wonders beyond imagining, only to take them back again. From the sleek ichthyosaurs of the Triassic to the towering mosasaurs of the Cretaceous, life in the sea has flourished, conquered, and vanished in an endless cycle of creation and collapse. Looking back through the record left in stone, a quiet truth begins to surface. Dominance in nature is never permanent. Every creature that has ever ruled the sea has believed, in the wordless way of living things, that its world would last forever. The ichthyosaurs filled the Triassic waters with grace, their bodies sculpted by evolution into perfect swimmers. The plesiosaurs followed, their flippers cutting through calm lagoons and stormy currents alike. Then came the pliosaurs, and later the mosasaurs, fierce and unmatched. For millions of years, they reigned without question. Yet each in turn disappeared, leaving behind only fossils and the faintest outline of their reign. The pattern is clear, written into the sediments of time. A species rises when the world opens a door for it, when the environment shifts just enough to reward its form, its instincts, its way of living. Then, for a while, it thrives. Populations grow, territories expand, and diversity blossoms. But as dominance grows, flexibility often fades. The more perfect a creature becomes for its own time, the less able it is to face what comes next. The ocean is always changing, and even the finest design cannot keep pace forever. Dominance, it seems, is a fleeting gift. The fossils whisper this lesson again and again. The ichthyosaurs, once the swiftest hunters alive, vanished when their prey changed and their seas cooled. The plesiosaurs, masters of elegance, declined when competition grew fierce and ecosystems shifted. The mosasaurs, whose power and size made them lords of the Cretaceous, fell victim not to a rival, but to the planet itself, a sudden cosmic catastrophe that no creature could endure. Their reigns were long, but the ocean's story was longer. Each extinction left space for new life. Where one empire ended, another began. Yet every successor followed the same rhythm: rise, rule, and ruin. The same shapes returned, the same designs reappeared: long bodies, tapered tails, flippers instead of legs. The sea sculpted them again and again, rediscovering perfection only to watch it fade. It was not cruelty but renewal, a reminder that evolution is not a ladder, but a tide. Scientists often speak of survival of the fittest, but the phrase is easily misunderstood. Fitness in nature is not about strength, speed, or intelligence alone. It is about adaptability, the ability to change when the world does. A giant that can no longer find food is less fit than a small fish that can survive on scraps. A species that reproduces slowly, no matter how mighty, falters when the environment shifts too quickly. Adaptability, not dominance, is the true measure of success. When we study the rise and fall of marine reptiles, we see this law play out with quiet precision. The ichthyosaurs adapted quickly in their early days, evolving new shapes and hunting styles that let them fill every niche of the sea. But over time, their forms grew rigid. The diversity that once gave them strength narrowed into a few successful types. When the seas changed, their flexibility was gone. Evolution rewards innovation, but punishes stagnation. The same can be seen in the mosasaurs. They flourished during the warm, rich seas of the late Cretaceous, but their entire existence was bound to that stability. When the oceans acidified and food chains faltered, their bodies, designed for abundance, became a burden in scarcity. Smaller, more adaptable creatures survived, carrying the blueprint of endurance into the future. Even today, the pattern continues. The giants of the modern ocean, whales, sharks, and large fish, live under the same rule. They are strong, but not invincible. The climate shifts, the currents move. The chemistry of the sea changes, quietly, slowly, as it has countless times before. Yet beneath that uncertainty lies the same resilience that once brought life back from extinction. Evolution endures because it never stops moving. There is a humility in this realization. The history of the ocean is not a story of winners and losers, but of rhythm and renewal. Every rise carries the seed of its own fall, and every fall clears the space for something new. Dominance may glitter brightly, but adaptability is what keeps the flame alive. In the layers of rock that line ancient cliffs, the story of these cycles unfolds like the turning of pages. Each layer is a world unto itself, a time of abundance, a moment of loss, a slow return of life. When paleontologists hold a fossil in their hands, they are not just holding the remains of a creature, but a record of change, of resilience, of the Earth's endless conversation with itself. From that record, a lesson emerges as calm and constant as the sea itself. The strong may rule for a time, but the adaptable inherit the future. Life's triumph lies not in perfection, but in persistence. The ocean remembers them all, the hunters, the wanderers, the survivors. It keeps their memory not as tragedy, but as truth. For every creature that has fallen, another has risen in its place, reshaped by time, tested by change, and carried forward by the same quiet force that moves the tides. And so, the story continues, as it always has, not in the roar of dominance, but in the soft, steady rhythm of adaptation. If you stand by the sea and listen long enough, you may begin to sense it, a quiet rhythm beneath the sound of waves. It is not a voice in any human sense, but something older, deeper. The ocean remembers. For as long as there has been life, water has held its story. Every tide that rolls to shore, every drop that rises into mist, carries within it traces of what came before. The bones of ichthyosaurs, the scales of ammonites, the drifting remains of plankton, all returned to the sea, dissolved, and became part of something larger. Over time, these fragments mingled, carried by currents that circle the globe, drawn into clouds, returned as rain. The same molecules that once filled the lungs of a mosasaur now rest within coral reefs, or move through the bloodstream of a whale. The ocean is not merely a place, but a memory bank, a living archive of evolution. Each wave that folds and fades against the sand holds atoms that have been recycled countless times, through bodies, through ages, through silence and rebirth. The calcium in a seashell may have once belonged to the skeleton of an ancient marine reptile. The salt on your skin after a swim may carry the remnants of volcanic minerals that once nourished the first plankton. The hydrogen in every drop of seawater has existed since the birth of the universe, unchanged across billions of years. Life, in its endless variety, is built from this shared inheritance. When the great marine reptiles perished, their remains sank slowly into the depths. Sediment wrapped around them like a blanket, layer after layer of fine silt, sealing them from time's decay. Their bodies dissolved, leaving minerals to take their place. But even as their forms vanished, their atoms did not. They drifted, carried by chemical exchange, absorbed by new life. The elements of one creature became the foundation of another. A carbon atom from a plesiosaur's heart may now be part of a whale's fin. A molecule from an ichthyosaur's eye may lie within a droplet of water falling from a modern storm. Time in the ocean does not erase, it recycles. In this way, the sea is the planet's bloodstream. It moves nutrients, salts, and traces of the past across every coast, every depth. It binds all eras together. The first microbial mats that clung to rocks billions of years ago, the sprawling coral cities of today, and the strange lives yet to come. Even in its quietest moments, the ocean is never still. Its memory stirs with each current. The deep water that rises to the surface along a cold coastline carries with it the ghosts of countless centuries, minerals drawn from the seafloor where ancient bones turned to stone. That same water will nourish plankton, which will feed fish, which will feed whales, and so the pattern continues, life born from the memory of life. Scientists studying the chemistry of seawater can trace this eternal conversation. Within the dissolved elements, they find records of past climates, ancient volcanoes, and extinctions long faded from view. The isotopes of oxygen and carbon whisper of shifting temperatures and vanished currents. Each molecule, in its own small way, carries a signature, a trace of where it has been and what it has touched. To look into the ocean is to look into the continuity of existence itself. Time does not move in straight lines here. It folds and returns upon itself like waves on a shore. What once lived below the surface has become part of everything that follows. Every living thing that swims, drifts, or breathes beneath the waves owes its being to the remains of what came before. When a whale exhales a cloud of mist into the cold air, that vapor may contain atoms once trapped inside an ammonite shell. When sea spray touches your face, it carries the memory of ancient oceans that existed before land was green. The connection is invisible, yet absolute. The same water that flowed around the bones of Shonosaurus now flows through the veins of fish and coral. The ocean remembers all of it, the ages of fear and silence, of abundance and renewal. It remembers the weight of giants gliding through its depths, the shimmer of ammonites spiraling through light, the brief pulse of each life that rose and fell within it. Nothing is truly lost here. It is only transformed. Even death in the sea is not an ending. When a creature sinks into the deep, it becomes part of the great exchange, feeding the invisible cities of bacteria, the drifting rain of organic dust, the slow growth of coral skeletons. The ocean reclaims everything, patiently weaving each life into the next. In this way, time itself feels almost circular. The same elements rise and fall, live and die, again and again, bound by water's eternal rhythm. The ocean's memory is not a story written in words, but in movement, chemistry, and light. It is a memory that touches everything, from the smallest droplet to the widest current, from the first spark of life to the breath you take now. And so, when you watch the waves, remember that they are not just water. They are time in motion, carrying the faint, unbroken memory of every creature that ever lived beneath their surface. Each ripple is a whisper from the past, and every tide a gentle reminder that life, in all its changing forms, has always been part of the same endless sea. The sea you see today, with its shimmering waves and darting fish, is not new. It is ancient, shaped by patterns set long before humans ever watched the horizon. The coral reefs, the drifting plankton, the silent movements of predators in the deep, all carry echoes of the Mesozoic, when reptiles ruled the water and evolution first wrote the rules that life still follows. The forms have changed, but the script remains. In the reefs of the Pacific, brilliant schools of fish weave between coral branches that glow in the filtered light. Predators circle at the edge of vision, patient and still. Beneath them, scavengers crawl across the sand, clearing the traces of each hunt. This rhythm of hunter and hunted, of movement and pause, is as old as the sea itself. The first marine reptiles lived by it. The first fish before them refined it. Every moment in the ocean today is an echo of that long, unbroken lineage of adaptation and survival. Coral reefs are among the oldest architects of life's memory. Though their living structures seem fragile, they are built upon the bones of the past, ancient limestone foundations that began forming when the first reefs appeared in the Cambrian seas, long before the age of the dinosaurs. During the Mesozoic, when ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs swam above them, reefs looked different, yet served the same purpose: to gather life. They were havens, nurseries, and feeding grounds, shaping biodiversity through their intricate geometry. Modern corals follow the same ancient strategy, partnering with microscopic algae that turn sunlight into food. This quiet collaboration has endured for hundreds of millions of years, surviving extinctions and shifting oceans. The color that floods through tropical seas today, blues, purples, and greens, is not only beauty but persistence. It is the same biological partnership that allowed ecosystems to flourish beneath the reign of giants. The predators, too, still follow the old design. Sharks, though, older than the marine reptiles, have inherited the crown of the ocean's rulers. Their sleek bodies, crescent tails, and endless motion mirror the hydrodynamic perfection first refined by the ichthyosaurs. Even the way they move, a smooth, effortless glide powered by a rhythm in their tails, repeats the physics that evolution discovered long ago. It is the same balance between drag and lift, between stillness and speed, that allowed the mosasaurs to dominate their ancient seas. Every ecosystem, no matter how small, holds this memory. The plankton drifting through sunlight are the heirs of organisms that once nourished ammonites and ancient fish. The migrations of whales, crossing hemispheres in their quiet annual journeys, follow paths first traced by currents that guided reptilian hunters millions of years ago. Even seabirds, rising and diving through waves, continue a story that began when flying reptiles skimmed the same waters in search of food. Life learns, forgets, and relearns, yet the ocean never truly loses its lessons. It remembers through form, through habit, through rhythm. A turtle gliding along a reef today carries within it the same instincts that guided its ancestors through the Cretaceous seas. The spiral of a nautilus shell, still forming in perfect proportion, is a living relic of a geometry that once filled the oceans with ammonites. The principles of survival, stealth, speed, camouflage, patience, have not changed, only their expressions. Scientists studying modern ecosystems often speak of ancient blueprints. They mean that evolution rarely starts from nothing. Instead, it reshapes what already works. The sleek silhouette of a dolphin is not a new invention, but a rediscovery of what the ichthyosaurs perfected. The social hunting patterns of orcas echo the cooperative behavior that may have existed among the great marine reptiles. Even the coral reef's layered complexity, where every species depends on another, reflects the same interwoven balance that once sustained the Mesozoic seas. The ocean's long memory reveals something profound. Evolution is not just the story of change, but of continuity. Adaptation is not always invention, but remembrance, the slow recollection of forms that have succeeded before. When a predator moves through the water with quiet confidence, when a school of fish scatters in precise unison, when a coral polyp stretches toward the sun, each action is shaped by patterns older than the continents themselves. Even the chemistry of the sea holds these echoes. The balance of oxygen, carbon, and nutrients, the slow cycling of elements from the deep to the surface and back again, all follow systems refined over eons. The same processes that once nourished the great reptiles now sustain whales, krill, and coral alike. The ocean has changed color, temperature, and shape, yet its pulse remains steady, measured by tides and moonlight. In the quietest moments, when the water is still and the horizon fades into mist, the divide between past and present seems to blur. Somewhere beneath that calm surface, the same principles that once guided Shonosaurus through Triassic depths still shape the motion of a blue whale. The difference is only time. Everything that lives in the sea today is part of that memory. Every fin, every scale, every heartbeat. Evolution's story is not one of replacement, but of resonance. Each new age builds upon the rhythm of the one before, carrying its lessons forward into new forms, new colors, and new lives. The modern ocean, for all its beauty, is a reflection of what has always been. Its predators still glide through ancient patterns, its prey still scatter in inherited fear, its corals still build cathedrals of calcium that shelter the future as they did the past. If you listen closely to the waves, you might almost hear it, the soft echo of the ancient sea, repeating itself in the language of life, reminding us that nothing in nature ever truly vanishes. It simply transforms, whispering the same old story through new voices over and over for as long as the ocean endures. Long before there were forests to sway in the wind or birds to color the sky, there was water. The ocean was Earth's first breath, its oldest mirror, and its greatest teacher. It has always been both creator and destroyer, a vast cradle that gave rise to beauty and terror alike. Within its depths, life found its boldest expressions, shaping bodies of impossible grace and strength. But in the same breath, it demanded a price. The monsters of the prehistoric seas were not born from cruelty, but from opportunity. The ocean offered space without limit and food without measure. It invited evolution to dream larger than ever before. From that invitation came creatures like the Ichthyosaurs, with their sleek bodies built for speed and endurance. There were Plesiosaurs, whose long necks traced elegant arcs through the water, and Mosasaurs, whose jaws carried the weight of ancient storms. They were the living embodiment of power and precision, shaped by a world that rewarded mastery over percented motion. For millions of years, they ruled. The ocean was their empire, their kingdom of silence and light. Yet, even in their dominance, the ocean was already preparing its next lesson. Every rise in nature carries within it the seeds of impermanence. The same forces that lifted these giants toward perfection also made them vulnerable to change. The tides that once carried them forward would one day carry them away. When the end came, it was not in cruelty but in rhythm. The ocean, as it always has, shifted its balance, currents cooled, chemistry changed, and sunlight faded. The water that had once nourished them turned against them, not with intention, but with indifference. The sea does not play favorites. It creates, it erases, and it begins again. But even in disappearance, they did not vanish entirely. Their bones sank to the seafloor, settling into silt and time. Layer by layer, their shapes hardened into stone, their presence recorded in the language of fossils. And over millions of years, those remains became storytellers. In the cracks of limestone and the shimmer of ancient shale, their memory persisted. When paleontologists brush away the dust of eons, they awaken more than bones. They touch the echo of an age when the ocean was filled with giants. The sea, in its quiet way, keeps everything. The salt that dries on your skin after a swim carries the same elements that once flowed through the veins of those reptiles. Every current, every raindrop, every mist above the waves holds atoms that were once part of their world. In this sense, they never left. Their story continues in every scale that catches the light, in every fin that cuts the surface, in every deep shadow that drifts beneath the waves. The ocean does not forget its lessons. It remembers through design, through rhythm, through the lives it continues to shape. It remembers in the sleek curve of a dolphin's body, in the power of a shark's tail, in the patience of a sea turtle's journey across entire oceans. It remembers in the coral's slow construction of worlds, and in the plankton's endless renewal of life. The same ancient logic that sculpted the first marine reptiles still flows beneath the surface, as steady as the tide. Power, the ocean reminds us, is never eternal. It is a moment, a form that exists only as long as the world allows it. But adaptation, the willingness of life to bend, to shift, to begin again, endures. It is this quiet persistence that connects all things, from the smallest fish to the largest whale. Evolution is not a race toward perfection, but a conversation with change. And the sea, patient and infinite, is where that conversation never ends. When we look at the ocean now, we are not seeing something separate from those distant ages. The water that moves beneath the moonlight is the same that once closed over a dying mosasaur, the same that cradled the first breath of a newborn ichthyosaur. Every wave is part of the same endless cycle. Life, death, renewal, and return. The monsters are gone, but their story is written everywhere. It hums in the surf, it lingers in the salt of our blood, it rises in the spray of a whale's breath. The sea that made them continues to shape the world, and in its depths, their legacy stirs like a memory half asleep. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, a low, endless whisper beneath the sound of the waves. It is not a roar, not a cry, but something softer, the voice of the ocean remembering its giants. Their time has passed, yet their influence remains, moving through the currents, gliding through the fabric of all living things. The ocean still tells their story, not through words, but through motion, light, and silence. And as the tide rises and falls, as the moon pulls at the water the way it always has, the message remains the same. That power fades, but life endures, adapting, remembering, beginning again. The monsters that ruled the prehistoric seas have long vanished into the folds of time, yet their presence still drifts among us. In every wave, in every shimmer of blue, in every trace of salt left on Earth's skin, they are still there, whispering, remembering, part of the eternal rhythm of the sea that made monsters.